Livonia. Paraphernalia, there you go.
Good morning. My name is Corby Easton from the Student Advocacy Service section, and I am responsible for facilitating the subgroup. Reviewed the curriculum for youth serving adults, so adults like educators, for child sexual abuse prevention training. It met the minimum requirements, and we asked the board to move this item forward for final approval.
Okay, so this is just another entity that people can use for instructional materials, correct? And explain to me, you said a little bit, youth serving adults. I wasn't quite sure what that meant.
So that meant for educators, teachers, principal, any individual that's in the building or volunteering that serve our youth.
Oh, okay.
Both at the elementary and secondary level.
Great, thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. All right, questions, discussions from, I'll put the motion on the table that we approve Safe Schools as a provider for child sexual abuse instruction materials. Is there discussion from board members?
Can I just ask, so I saw that it's for K through 6. Is there any training past that?
For this particular one, this one just for adults.
K through 6.
But both the elementary teachers and secondary could use this material as well.
Okay. Further questions?
And this is one option of many that teachers can choose, right? Is that, I'm not sure who exactly is choosing, but I know that we just have a collection of programs that teachers can choose from, or somebody can choose from.
There's one called Prevent Child Abuse that sort of does an awful lot of it. They're the major provider.
Yeah,
this is another option.
Okay.
Okay, so
I move that we approve this for use in the schools as designated.
Thanks, Carol. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Corby, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm kind of forgetting my manners as the chair, and so I would always go around the room and have people introduce themselves who were here with us. So let's introduce ourselves first. Janet Cannon.
Jenny Gravitt.
Carol Lear, District 7.
Elisa Ellis, District 12.
Patty Norman, Deputy Superintendent, Student Achievement.
Sherry Reedman, I work for Patty.
Thanks, Jill.
I'm Tammy Davey, Theater Law Staff here at the USD.
We'll get in.
Okay.
I'm Angela Neal, I'm the accountability specialist.
So Crystal Estrada, English learners, refugees, and immigrant students, specialist here.
Diana Suggs, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Troy Nordic, Driver Education, Teaching and Learning.
I'm Kathleen Cronister. I'm president of the Utah Alternative Education Association and principal at Mountain High School in the Davis School District.
Great. And Linda Hicks, board member in Joab School District and also representing Utah School Boards Association.
Welcome, Linda. All right, thank you. Let's move on to our next item, which is the driver education standards, and I think we'll turn to Troy Nordic to present this item for us.
Thank you. So my name is Troy Nordic. I'm with the Driver Education Specialist, and I'm here to report on the revision of the driver education standards and really get direction on how you guys would like to move forward with our standards. I'll give you a quick background as to where we are in the process, and then feel free to ask any questions that you guys might have. We went to the board January of this last year the board approved the opening of the standards. So we put together a writing committee. The writing committee met 4 different times. They took the standards and they modified them into the current board format. And then they added some changes like GDL laws and vehicle technology and really new safety techniques that help these novice drivers learn to be safe drivers on our roads. In July of this year, we came back to the board and the board approved the release for the 90-day public review. We put together some Google Forms, some Survey Monkeys, and we actually were lucky. We partnered up with Zero Fatalities Parent Nights, and we went out into the schools and presented the standards, the revised standards, to the public to get feedback. We collected a lot of feedback from the public. We met together as a writing committee again. We took all that feedback and we made some additional modifications to the standards. And really, they've presented their final edition, and that's what we're here for, to see where the board would like to take it with that. I put together a crosswalk for you, and I'll just explain what that is as far as the backup. On the left column, if you guys are looking at it, the left column contains the current standards. And then you can see in red, we actually added what their standards are modified into. The right column contains the revised standards. And with that, we also included the modifications we made after we collected all the parent feedback. You can see the modifications, we use strike-throughs and underlines. So really that right column contains the writing committee's final edition of the revised standards. So that's where we are.
I read through the standards and I thought the revisions were very much improved. I also read in there that we passed the graduated driver's license law in '99, and according to the Utah Department of Health, there has been a 62% decrease in the fatalities of teens from age 15 to 17.
In Utah, that's a huge number, huh?
Isn't that just incredible?
That is.
I'm just so tickled about that. Jenny.
I love how instructor friendly these new standards are. And I saw that was a lot in the comments. And then also, I like the air quality was added. I mean, the public comments were great and some important things were added, but as a teacher, they are so instructor friendly.
Good.
Clear. Very good.
Did you have something?
I did. I just wanted to make sure I understood. This is like the driver's ed version of the core curriculum. Is that
correct?
This is because it's obviously not part of the core. This is just what helps teachers stay consistent.
And can I add something to that?
Sure.
Just so you guys know, the board is in charge of the classroom standards, and the driver's license division is in charge of behind the wheel. Okay. So really, this is what we teach them in the classroom, and then we're also governed by the driver's license division as the application part. So
you're fine. I'm just trying to. That's helpful.
Okay, I had a couple of things. So I was reading in your strands here, and welcome, Sarah John. And so under strand 1, you have 1.1, 1.3, 1.4, and they all talk about providing evidence of a discussion and so forth. So could you elucidate on what that would look like?
Sure.
How we would verify?
We didn't want to standardize anything. We kind of wanted to leave that up to the teacher as to how they would like to collect that evidence. Again, we've partnered with Zero Fatalities, and they're awesome at the services they provide to us. They come into each of the schools and provide a parent night. We invite the students, all driver education students, and their parents to come and listen to Zero Fatalities talk about GDL laws, talk about the 5 deadly behaviors and ideas to fix that. If the parents and students attend that, we consider that as evidence of a discussion. If they're unable to make it, then the teacher can provide them some other form of evidence, where it's an assignment with questions and answers, or they record it, or really however the teacher would like to do it.
So it's just open to teacher interpretation.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Are there other concerns, comments?
I don't have internet. It looks good.
You don't have internet?
No.
I have a copy if you'd like to see it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've looked at it, but it's fine. No, I don't have any questions on it.
Okay, so you would like to get our input, I think. Oh, I had one other question. Standard 4.6, students will perform map reading and trip planning exercises. So is that like using Google Maps and Apple Maps and that kind of thing?
So we actually had this
We did have a
discussion
discussion, yeah.
at the last board committee meeting. Again, we didn't want to standardize anything, and we want the teacher to use whatever technology that's available to help these kids learn how to plan trips and things like that. We didn't necessarily want to pull out all maps and go over, map reading techniques, but we wanted to make sure that they can use the available technology, whether it's GPS, Google Maps, or whatever, to help them plan trips. And again, we just left it up to the teacher and to decide how they want to do that.
I wouldn't be able to get anywhere without Apple Maps.
I know, remember the old days.
Okay, so I think the input you've gotten from us is very positive, that we think this is a job well done. And what would the next step forward be?
Well, I would like to see the board approve the standards, and we can move forward from there. Get it out to have the teachers.
Then I'm looking
Actually,
for a motion.
The next step, because you don't have the final
Because we'd
version
accept
here,
the
the next step would
The
be,
next step.
yeah, you'd accept the report, and then next month Troy would come with what the final document would look like that would go to teachers instead of just the crosswalk, and then that would be it.
So
Okay,
I
so-
move to accept the report
Okay,
and then
motion
next,
that we received. Okay.
and then next month bring the final standards to us.
So can I get this straight, just so I make sure I understand? You want me to produce the final edition to this committee, and then we'll go forward the following month to the board?
Okay, so our motion on the table is to receive this report. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So you want, all right, we've had a request to hold off on item 3.3 until we can get another staff person in here. So we will now go to item 3.4. This is an information item on KEEP, our kindergarten entry and exit profile. And okay.
Hello.
Hi, will you introduce yourself?
Yes, I would love to. I'm Sydney Carter. I'm the Assessment Development Coordinator here at the Utah State Board of Education. And as many of you are aware, we have been in the process of developing a kindergarten assessment that's common across the state. So we have had for many, many years legislated that kindergartners are administered an entry and an exit assessment. What changed recently was that we developed a common assessment so that districts were able to utilize the information and the data that they were gathering on their kindergarten students to help them know how best to support those kindergarten students, as well as look at the funds that we have available that we're using right now for extended day kindergarten options across the state. And so the assessment department has been working really closely with teaching and learning and developing an entry assessment that was administered at the beginning of the school year this year. And we are just in the process of finalizing the exit assessment, we have sent out the exit assessment to all districts through assessment directors and literacy directors and curriculum directors. Thanks, Jen. And have been able to show kindergarten teachers specifically what the exit assessment looks like, and it's something that is similar to things that they've seen on that they've been administering in their districts and charters for the last several years. This report is just informational based off of our entry assessment, some information that we've gone through after we administered the assessment. We went through a standards process and developed some standards of where we feel like students would be predictive of their future academic success. And so the report is showing merely the amount of students we've tested, so you can see the different demographic groups and their performance, how many students in the state in kindergarten administered or participated in the assessment. And then we also have levels of performance. So as we went through our standards process, we determined that we wanted to have 3 levels of performance, and we discussed long and hard what those descriptors may be, and ended up with very generic descriptors, but of levels 1, 2, and 3, which are similar to what we have on our SAGE assessment. So a level 1, similar to SAGE, would be our lowest level, and a level 3 would be our highest level, where a student who would be entering kindergarten with the prerequisite skills and knowledge for them to be successful. We found that our literacy, we have 2 areas of the assessment that were reported to the state, a literacy and a numeracy area. We found that students overall in the state, 62% of the students came with those prerequisite skills ready for kindergarten. In numeracy, we had 72.5% of the students prepared with those proficiency skills, which, as we were discussing, makes some sense with we have students, parents are doing counting. Yeah. When you have something in front of you, let's count those things. So they have those prerequisite numeracy skills as they enter kindergarten. And literacy, some of the, unless they've attended preschool, they may not have some of the phonics and phonemic awareness skills that that we have. But we do have 62% of students entering kindergarten prepared with those prerequisite skills in literacy, which matches really, really closely with what we see with our DIBELS data across the state. We have 61.4% students proficient on DIBELS. So our literacy numbers, we were happy that they matched fairly closely with what we see with DIBELS. We also see the demographic subgroups, the percentages of students, how they were in each of the areas of literacy and numeracy. We have some real concerns with English learner students coming in really, really low, and as our kindergarten teachers are aware, they know they have some work there to help those students that are English learners to become more proficient and to help them with those prerequisite skills that are essential for them to be successful in their academics. And then the rest of the report goes into each charter or school district that participated. We had all school districts and most of the charters participated in the assessment and giving us the data. So you can see the data by district or charter, as well as the subcategories for each of those districts and charters.
So was this optional for school districts and charters?
Yeah,
so the way that the rule is written is it's mandatory for anyone receiving K-3 software money or OEK funds or some other kind of funding sources. So districts basically it's mandatory for. Charters have an option if they don't receive any of those funding sources to not participate. So we had 4 charters opt out of participation.
But only 4.
Yeah. Out of about 80, right? So yeah, it was a pretty good. I think we had 97.6% participation, which is pretty great for a first year administration where it is optional per se, some level, depending on how you interpret.
And we, the assessment team and the teaching and learning team traveled across the state and met with about 1,700 kindergarten teachers across the state this summer, training them on administering the assessment and calming fears of it's kindergarten students, we're testing them. We were actually really impressed with the positive feedback that we got, that oftentimes this assessment was shorter than what they had been administering and gave them the same information. And we found that we had really valuable feedback and positive feedback from the field. So we were excited about that, and we're excited for people to see our exit assessment and to administer the exit.
I just want to say I love how this report is set up. Whoever designed it, beautiful.
I was just trying to communicate.
No, it's just I think it's so valuable.
We made it pretty.
Well,
pretty,
very good. And and I was curious. So teachers in general, kindergarten teachers liked.
Yeah,
Because I know they were really
positive.
a little nervous about it.
Yeah.
And then have they seen the exit? Any of them seen the exit yet? And
We
how are they
released
feeling
the
about that?
exit last month.
Uh-huh.
It's rigorous. And
Is it?
so
Is it going to be longer than the
we think
entry?
it'll probably be closer to 20 minutes for the
Okay,
one-on-one.
but not too long.
And then there's a couple small group portions.
Okay.
But we anticipate the small group can be done during the school day, so it's not
Okay.
having to be done in a separate time. It's rigorous. We ask kids to write sentences, and there is some beliefs that kids can't do that. And
They can.
we have evidence that they can.
And I love, can I just say, I love the data that's being collected
Yeah,
from this. So
it's
this is
gonna
good
be-
data.
It's going to be
So
great.
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited about it. But
One of the concerns as we've been developing the exit assessment, one thing kindergarten teachers always ask about is sight words, and are sight words going to be a part of the exit assessment? We don't, from the state, have specific sight words that are mandated. We don't say these are the 10 or 25 words. Different districts or charters use, words or fry list or specific words from their basals. And so we didn't feel like it was fair to say these are the sight words that you have to know from the state. So that may be something that each LEA may choose to assess their own sight words in a different way, but that is not part of the exit assessment, and the question that many people have asked.
So tell us about the phonics assessment, or how you're assessing phonics.
So we're doing it in more of an encoding way, so they either have to read CBC words, which is like a consonant about consonant, or nonsense words built in that kind of same framework of CBC. So they're having to decode and use their phonics skills, not only on words that they might just know by sight, but also having to decode words that they've never seen before, as well as encoding. So we have one of the items is to have them actually record words that we say, so they're having to use their phonics to match the sound to print in writing. So that's kind of, we're measuring it in two ways. Not only can you decode, but can you also encode those things. So we should see I think we're going to see where the gaps continue to persist in our early years.
So coming in, your phonemic awareness and phonics was the lowest score. So I'm really hoping that teachers will focus on that.
Yes, and that's something
And
as
build
we
those
look
skills.
at our preschool programs, something we're going to go back with them in the coming months to kind of do some coaching on them. As we go out and do our preschool observations for the high quality programs, we're not seeing a lot of phonemic awareness instruction even happening in our preschool settings, and so it's a gap in our early childhood environment in general. And so the test results help us to communicate that message. Like, this is a concern area, it's very low, and really first sounds should be something that you're working on a daily basis.
For
preschool.
reading.
Yeah, it's a highly predictive skill, and especially for students who are going to experience reading difficulties, if we can hit them in preschool with some of those skills, we'll be much more likely to get them to be readers by third grade than if we keep waiting to get that skill in. So the phonemic awareness and phonics is definitely the thing that we've spent the last couple of years really trying to do some heavy lifting around resource development and training, because it's a dearth of knowledge in our state, unfortunately, and it is a huge underlying factor whether you become a reader. And so as we look at our state data, it's playing out in our lack of all of our students getting to that level of proficiency. So the test is rigorous, which it's the kindergarten standards compared to preschool standards, right? So the entry test was preschool standards, the exit test is kindergarten standards, and so as you kind of progress through, what teachers' perception of what the end of kindergarten looks like may be a little different than what the standards are actually asking for, and so the biggest feedback has been on how much time, and we're going to go out and test some students in the middle of kindergarten and the middle of first grade and kind of get an idea of where maybe end of year kindergartners. We tested some of the items last spring with kids, so we have some writing samples that prove kids can do the writing. That has been the one that I've probably gotten 3 or 4 emails on. Kids can't do this. I'm like, oh, we have lots of samples. I'd be happy to share them with you, because we tested probably 70 kids last spring, and they did a great job. And so some of it's teacher expectations that we'll have to kind of reframe a little bit, but we're excited to do so.
So in the state's kindergarten curriculum, does it include writing
It
sentences?
does. Yep. So,
And does it include phonics?
yes. So the curriculum, the standards do. It's the implementation of those standards sometimes. So how explicit we're teaching those things. It's not that teachers aren't teaching the sounds of the letters. It's more how explicitly is that being done? How many practice opportunities are we getting? How much opportunity are we getting to practice those in print? I look at a lot of our basal programs and they go through like teaching words in isolation, but never get to a connected text where kids apply that skill in reading. And that's a gap because to read isolated words is not the goal of reading. It's to read text and understand and make meaning. And we're not seeing that with a lot of even the basic programs that are being adopted. And so we're helping we have a phonics template we created this year to help people realize what components should be in a phonics lesson so they can look at their program and say, oh, we have these 6 items, these other 2 aren't present, we can weave those in pretty easily. But that awareness factor has been kind of where we're having to spend some time. What should be a high quality phonics lesson because we're missing some components.
Do you still, when these children are tested, is it still a one-on-one before school starts?
The entry was one-on-one, all of it. The teachers felt pretty passionate about that, is that this is the kids' first experience. Yes. They wanted to really have that one-on-one time. So we respected that and made sure all of it was one-on-one. The exit test, we feel like they've been with the students all year, that we could do some group opportunities. When we talked about having some of them whole group, they got a little worried as kindergarten teachers. So we said, okay, we understand. Go ahead and do them in small groups. That way you can pace a little differently because some of your kids are really fast and some kids are slower, and so you can set those groups up appropriately. So we're doing small group, just a couple of the items are small group in the literacy portion. Numeracy is all one-on-one just because of the way that items are oriented.
And it is legislated that kindergarten teachers or kindergarten students can take up to 12 days a year where the students are not in school, and the teachers can do that one-on-one testing during that school day. Certain districts, charters do it differently. Some of them pay their teachers to come early, and some of them do it during the school year and in different ways. But they have that availability for the students to not be there, so they can schedule that one-on-one testing during the school day.
Okay, then a question about the exit exam. When will you administer it, and how quick is the turnaround to get feedback back to the school and the teachers?
So board rule is the last 4 weeks of school is when the administration window is. So that's variable depending when the school district ends. The data has to be entered by June 15th, except for a couple of our year-round schools, they have a little bit longer just due to they're not done with school at that time, so it just makes more sense to give them a little longer. In terms of the return on their data, we have to set cut scores again for exit. So it's going to be a few months, I would expect, before they'll get it. Kind of like this time, they administered in August, September. We finally got cut scores in December, and it's just because of the way the process takes. So this first year of implementation is rough in terms of usefulness of the data. They're going to have their data and they'll have numbers, counts, but they won't actually know what those numbers mean, like what's proficient. And so that's something even as we did this year with entry, they can go back and look now, but it has no meaning, honestly. But you have to have a year of cut scores to make that happen. Next year for entry, it'll be instant. So we're working with our programmers to develop a bit more robust reporting system, because right now it was counts and just kind of a basic report. We'll have 6 levels of reporting starting next fall. So you'll have like the individual student report, a classroom report, a grade level report, a school report, an LEA report, and then a state report. So we'll have lots of levels of reporting.
Data.
Yeah, and the individual student report will also have on there for the parent. If you're failed in a particular area or you're showing not proficient, here are 2 to 3 activities that you can do with your child at home. So trying to give parents some kind of resources of, okay, my kid's low in this area, what do I do as a parent? So our kindergarten teachers are working with our team to kind of develop some easy implementation things parents can do to support literacy and numeracy that don't take a lot of resources or materials or really minimal, like driving in the car, let's rhyme some words, some really little things. So
That's what I was going to ask is how will the information get to the parents? Because I know as a teacher sometimes if I don't get it out there, it'd be so nice because then I think parents would find this valuable. I love the idea that you give them the score, you give them the data, and then you give them some quick things because a lot of parents don't know.
Yeah.
So will it go?
So
will the teacher send it out, or is it
That's
required?
part of the point, but
I think somehow we need to make sure it gets
a
to
lot
parents.
of the districts are looking at their student backpack systems to be able to upload these reports so that parents have access, just
and
like
they
they
can
would
just
for anything else. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, ultimately, at this point, it's in the data gateway, but parents don't
Yeah,
have
but
access
parents
to the
don't
data
know, 'cause
gateway at the individual student
I
level.
wish we could find a way through the whole system
Yeah,
to do that for parents,
absolutely.
because then we would get more buy-in.
Yeah, well, then they get that. I mean, the whole point of testing them is
Yeah,
not just for us, but
right.
for them to know where their child is. And so, looking at that resource in the beginning of the year, it'll be very easy. I mean,
Yeah,
honestly,
because they probably meet.
they can sit down with the parent right after because the reporting will be done. I
But
think
the
most
exit
won't,
one,
but-
where it's June 15th,
Yeah, right.
how are parents going to get that?
Well, they can enter it sooner. They just have to have it entered
Yeah.
by the 15th, so they can mail it. I mean, they could give it to them on their last couple of days.
But it's up to the district to
yeah.
decide.
So
Okay.
that might be a piece for us to kind of work on is the
I
communication.
think it would be so valuable to,
Kind
to
of
say
like Sage.
force
I've
it.
never seen my daughter Sage
Right.
in 3 years. So
The one year I sent them home for my students, then the English language arts had to get rescored, and so
Oh,
it
no.
was it was kind of a problem. But anyway,
ignore those. Yeah.
Okay, are there, this is an information item. Are there other questions or input we want to give? This has been a great report. Thank you so much. Should we take a motion to receive the report? I'll make a motion we receive. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so we are moving to 3.5, which is a rule on release time classes. And this rule is up for its 5-year continuation. And there have been a few minor amendments to it, which we'll turn to Deputy Patty Norman.
So Deputy Superintendent Patty Norman, this rule, R277610, is up for its 5-year renewal, and with the rule, it actually has no substantive changes. It just makes it in compliance and the correct formatting that is current. So going down throughout the line, starting on line 9, again, it's which permits the board to, instead of saying adopt rules, it says make rules to execute. So there's no substantive changes within it. It's just complying to the current way of writing rules going through it. So the motion is just to, I can't make a motion.
Just to continue it as amended.
No.
Okay. Give you a minute to look through those. Did you finally get on the internet?
I did, but now I've got to find a plus. I
So
found
you're with the
the wrong side of the table.
You have your.
I have a plug, no, I'm just looking for it way upstairs. No, I don't have it online.
She said that she should be in there.
Oh, no, because
I'm used to the board room, we always have. Okay, well,
Yeah.
now I'll have to make sure I'm charged.
Sherry,
I'll have to make sure I'm charged. In the boardroom, it wasn't something I had to worry about.
I move that we approve this on first reading, second reading,
Okay, yeah.
pass on to the board, and continuation. As amended for continuation and as amended and for final reading by the board at the next meeting.
Second. You don't need a second.
I mean, might as well. I'll give it a third. It's Utah's birthday. Let's live it up.
Be wild and crazy.
That's
Go
right.
crazy.
Party time.
Okay, so our motion is to approve the amended rule and continue it on first reading and recommend the board approve it on second and final reading. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Who
made the motion?
Motion made by Carol. All right, let's go ahead and we will move to 3.6. So this is regards the teacher salary supplement program, and Diana is going to take us through this.
I am. So again, Diana Sedgwick, Director of Teaching and Learning. I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage because I'm not the one that wrote the rule. So Ben did that, and he normally comes and discusses the rule. So I apologize for being a little bit less than prepared on this. And Travis, who's the other one who knows a lot about it, is home ill today. So basically what this rule does is it takes what the legislature enacted last year in terms of awards to teachers with national board certificates, and it puts into rule our processes for managing that award that really comes from the legislature. So there was a rule before that had to do with who was eligible to get these TSSP funds, and so the first part is just kind of some cleanup that Ben did in terms of terminology, and then the substantial part of the change then is in 521-3, where it says Teacher's Salary Supplement Program. Now that we've been doing this for a little while, Jane Conway, who is our technician who runs this award, has a pretty good idea about when she needs to receive things in order to process them and get them back to teachers. So you see some deadlines that have been put in as part of that. And then also some clarification of what if a teacher's only working part-time in their subject area. So what if I'm nationally board certified in math, but I'm teaching science or something along those lines. And then also Title I was included this last year. So you'll also see some language in there about Title I teachers, and then again the partial award. And then in Section 6, line 55, you see an appeal process for people who feel like they should be receiving the award and are not. And then that, let's see, I think that's really the basis of the rest of it.
How often do they appeal, Diana?
I am not aware of, people complain, they don't necessarily appeal.
That's different.
Where is that in here? When do they have to complain by?
Quite often people, with the TSSP, this is the same one that you've heard people, the complaints usually are about the math part.
Right.
You have to have that, you have to have the degree in level 4, but our hands are tied in some of these situations because it's what's in the legislation, and that's kind of the case here too. So I don't anticipate a lot of appeals because normally we can explain to the person why they are not eligible, but it could happen.
So you haven't had a lot, is what you're saying? Or
how much funding did they give to this?
That's a great question, and I don't know
So
the answer.
each teacher, per teacher, so 4,100. It was 4,100, and now moving forward it will be 4,000. And then each in the 2018-19 school year. After 2018-19, it's going to be an additional 1,000 per school year if the teacher stays on. So that's how it's been done. And then the reason why is trying to.
Well, that's the proposal. Are you thinking about Winder's bill?
Yeah.
Is that so? That's not part of this rule. Right. So that's a separate.
Because the statute says 4,100.
Yeah.
4,100.
And what's happened is when this first started, when the TSSP programs first started, it was 5,000. And every year, because they expand the number of people that are eligible, the actual award reduces because they haven't kept up in terms of the overall appropriation.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have figures or knowledge of how many national board certified teachers we have in Utah?
That's where I could really use Travis.
Is
It's
it-
not a lot.
Not
Because, especially compared to other states, because Utah has, until this year, hasn't really rewarded that.
Yeah,
It's not as many states, but.
Sorry, I was just gonna say from the side here, it's about 300.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sorry, Sarah Jones with UEA.
But has there been more interest because of the award?
This is the first
Yeah, the
year,
first
so
year.
it,
'Cause I
so
know
we'll
in our
have to look
district,
at
we're
some
maybe
data
starting a
and
cohort,
see,
yeah.
right? I know that I
geez,
periodically get
yeah.
emails from people, that the board used to support the application process and used to have funding for, because it's
So expensive.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's why I
Yeah.
get it.
And so I do get queries about that every so often, but in terms of people actually seeking it, I think we'll have to look at the data after this is implemented fully.
Is there, and there's no subsidy, I mean, a little bit off topic in terms of, but there's no subsidy for national board
There is-
certification anymore.
Not for earning it, only for having
Having
it.
it, right, but,
But to go through the process, the teacher would have to put the money up front
Right.
in order to go through
Yeah,
that.
and it's expensive.
Do districts,
Some districts,
Some districts will have an extra amount of pay on that. The other thing that they currently get is a level 3 certificate, and which
yeah,
in essence gives you 2 more years until you have to renew it. That's
yeah, I don't know. It's off topic, we'll talk about that later, I'm still wrestling
But
with
I think a lot of other states, some states pay for their teachers. to
Yeah, they
get national
do.
board certification, and other states are doing.
that's why a lot of teachers don't do it.
Yeah, an awful lot to support that
Yeah.
in Utah. And this one, it looks like it gives a, $750 as a supplement to pay back
right. So the
what they
last
spent on getting board certified.
the last couple of years, there is an organization of national board certified teachers who've been working with various legislators over the last couple of years and really trying to get there to be more either funding for the application or funding afterwards. And so this is the result of that work that they've done.
So there's something in here, and they get it every year.
Yes.
Every year. Okay. Then as I look over who's eligible to have this award, it looks to me like they've put areas in here that are critical shortage areas for teachers. So secondary level mathematics, integrated science, chemistry, physics, computer science. These are all kind of critical shortage areas, but they've left out critical shortages in speech pathology, special education, those types of things. So why did they leave those out?
That's probably a question for the legislature. One of the reasons is because of the numbers of those teachers. And so again, anytime you increase the pool, it's the same reason that the level 4 teachers haven't been successful in being recognized as part of this. Anytime you increase the pool, you decrease the reward. And when you get below 4,000, the studies show that it won't have an effect. And even the 4,000 is kind of iffy. Most of the studies say it has to be 5,000 or above to actually have any kind of an impact.
So,
and Janet, I think in response to that, I think that if you remember that PJEP program, it subsidized special ed teachers for a number of years, and I think maybe that was one of the reasons that this targeted other teachers.
is that still around?
No, the funding just went up.
So in terms of funding for this, is this above the line funding or below the line funding? Is it ongoing, or is it something that they have to address? So it's ongoing at a specific amount, but it doesn't grow as the pool of teachers grow. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So before us us. We are asked to approve draft number 1 as amended on first reading. Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah.
For public comment?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Sarah Jones with UEA. I tried to get in touch with Travis yesterday, so maybe Diana can answer my questions, but yeah, it sounds like he's not doing very well. I did have a couple of questions about the rule. It's really clarification, because there are some lines in here about the reimbursement that's not clear to me. So on line 80, excuse me, I'm also sick, but on line 85, at the end of section 3, it says that, you know, if the funding for that year is not sufficient to cover all the eligible teachers, that's reduced proportionally. But the last line says, and applications filed in accordance with section 4 will not receive reimbursement. That's the reimbursement for those who had pursued national board certification. So my question about that is when this bill was passed by Representative Ellison in 2016, the fiscal note did specifically set and anticipate an amount that would go towards reimbursement for those teachers that had fronted the money for national board certification or recertification. And that's on the next page, lines 99 and 100, which have been struck. So what I'm wondering is the implication from this going to be, or the outcome, that if that pool of eligible teachers grows, that suddenly reimbursement is no longer prioritized, and it's the stipend. And not that we don't want the teachers, the eligible national board teachers, to get the stipend, because that's a great benefit of earning your certification, but reimbursement was also part of that legislation in 2016. And so what really is the impact? And then the last line at the very end of the bill, the rule 107 and 108, superintendent determines funding for reimbursement after all disbursements for the TSSP have been paid. So really, what is going to happen to reimbursements? Is there not going to be money available for reimbursements? Because I do think that's a great incentive. It's the fiscal note when the bill was passed in 2016 anticipated the cost of certification at $2,150 and the cost of recertification at $1,250. So that's a substantial investment. And so that was really my question, is what's going to be the impact of this, and will reimbursement no longer be available?
It's a great question, and I think as we were crafting the rule, one of the things that was a concern is to not take away from the existing TSSP, or as you said, the TSSP for the National Board, in order to fund the applications, if in fact there were suddenly a lot of people who wanted. So, 300 people right now have gone through the process and been awarded National Board. Figure there's probably twice that many that have gone through the process. What if all of a sudden next year there were 1,000 people? So because the data that we used for the fiscal note is based on history where this program wasn't in place, then that's a protection to not deplete the existing program for the new program, should in fact our projections be under what they would really be. So this protects the original program, and then if that turned out to be the case, that would be the time then to go back to the legislature and say, here's all the things that you want to do, the money isn't sufficient for that, and then we could make that case with them.
And what wasn't clear from the way this was being written is that there was a line item. The line item for National Board was $246,300 that was passed with House Bill 31 in 2016. So is that money kind of all rolled up into the TSSP program that now applies to math science teachers? Is it kept separate?
Yes.
Okay, because it didn't read that clearly to me that when it says after all disbursements for the TSSP have been paid, that then we focus on reimbursement, that there is actually this dedicated money that goes just to the National Board stipends. And the stipends come first, and the reimbursement comes second. I don't know, I didn't feel like that's really clear.
And I want to make sure I'm understanding, because I'm trying to read this at the same time I'm listening to you guys, but
So,
Is this-
so the rule has two parts to it. First is TSSP, and then it says, and National Board Certification Reimbursement.
Right, well, and I want to get, my point was, if there's nothing in the law that requires the TTSP or TSSP or however the initials are, if it doesn't require that to trump the reimbursements, I would rather spread it thinner overall and make sure there's some reimbursement. Unless it's what you're saying, that because we don't have the appropriation language in front of us, we have the codified version of the bill, but do you recall, Sarah, if there was?
Well, this is the fiscal note, and the fiscal note is an anticipation. I mean, the fiscal note is not legislation.
And it's not, yeah.
Fiscal note is not legislation. But the way the fiscal note was derived at the time was we kind of anticipate historically there have been about 30 people that have achieved certification every year, sometimes quite a bit less. And so here's how we maybe factor in how much the stipends would be and how much reimbursement costs would be, and we'd anticipate this amount set aside for reimbursements. I think the thing that we're just concerned about is whether reimbursements would be continue to be provided for as well as stipends. Is there a need to ask the legislature for more money? And does this language provide for protection of both things?
Well, and I'm kind of asking a little bit different question. I'm saying if the law doesn't have the initials trump the reimbursement, I would rather spread it across the whole group.
The Superintendent Dixon has some information to your point.
We now have funding that comes to us attached, coded in separate pots. So instead of coming to us in a bulk pot, it would say $231,000 some odd dollars for reimbursement, the rest for TSSP. So when Natalie's staff tracks that, it legally no longer can get put into one pot. So we have to track that very specifically.
Yeah, but and I'm sorry, maybe I'm not asking this question well. I get what you're saying, but
this was more for Sarah. I'm sorry, because Sarah was concerned that maybe that 231 would get put into the commingled pot, but it comes to us now very specifically with its own code. Yeah. So that 231, the 231,000 would be tracked that way for National Board. So your question was, should we ask the legislature for more money? Always for National Board.
That was rhetorical.
But I'm still trying to figure out if there's anything in the law. These are kind of lumped together, but I can't find anything as I quickly read the statute that says that this money should be paid out first, and this money, the teacher certification reimbursements should be paid second.
Yeah, so if that's what if you wanted, this was the specialist who handles this, working with Ben Rasmussen and Travis to think about how to operationalize it so that they know what to do. If what they've put down here isn't what you want them to do, if you would rather have them just be first come, first served, or lower the amounts, or whatever it is that you want instead, this would be your opportunity to say, no, we need to go back and look at this rule and do it this other way. Because you're making the rule right now.
Well, and the point is, it's not just my druthers. I don't think the law kind of allows us. The law doesn't allow us to give to try to maintain the benefit for one group and lessen the benefit for another group.
Right. So what I'm saying is we just need to have in rule what we're supposed to do. If there's not enough money, what does the board want us to do?
My druthers would be to just decrease all of the awards overall, including the math awards, but then also but that wouldn't.
We couldn't do the math awards because that's that separate pot of money. So the math awards have their own pot of money, and the National Board, it's sort of difficult because two different pots of money have ended up in the same rule here. So we can only spend the TSSP that's for math and science for that, and we can only spend the National Board for that, but they're governed by the same rule. if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and so what you are saying is we can't just reduce it across the board. We have to essentially do it this way.
But as one pot grows, then overall, and the money doesn't grow, then overall that's reducing it for everyone in that pot. And then the same happens over here as that pool of people grows and the money doesn't grow, it gets reduced.
So the national board TSSP award could be reduced with additional applicants. That could happen. And that's what this rule was trying to prevent, is to say, so there's this benefit to getting the national board, and you can count on that benefit. And then we're also going to help. And, you know, again, if there's not enough, we would definitely want to go back to the legislature. We want to help incentivize people to actually earn it in the first place.
Is it, if it's more than, if it exceeds 30, is there any way we will reimburse you up to 30 people? Is that what you're saying? Like, if we go over that,
that could
then
be a choice.
Looking at line 96.
Yeah.
Through 98, it addresses that. Subject to legislative appropriations, the superintendent shall reimburse a certificate teacher.
Right.
First come, first serve, until funds are exhausted.
But I guess as a teacher, it would be nice to know that, because I know, like in Weaver, we're starting a cohort, and the understanding is we'll be reimbursed. But I said, I know there's a limit on that. And so they're like, well, what's the limit? And I don't know if it would be helpful to say, we will reimburse up to 30 per year. And so maybe that is first come, first serve. Like, if you really want your national board, you need to apply to be one of the first 30. Because then you know going in whether or not you're going to be reimbursed, unless, everybody gets it.
This ongoing, this award is ongoing
But
annually.
I think it would be nice to know.
It is annual.
I think what you're asking is that when we have the application period, we be really transparent about how much is available at that time.
And then we know whether to do it, because I'd hate to go through it and then not get reimbursed when I thought I was going to get reimbursed.
Right.
And then speaking to lines 101 and 104, if the funds are insufficient to reimburse,
really
then
unclear.
you get put on kind of a waiting list,
Okay.
and you'll be first the next year.
That would
so
be awesome.
what does that really look like in application?
Sorry, you've been
okay,
so
this is
fine. I can't be. I'm not
this
seeing.
is confusing to me. So if you're a national board certified teacher and you apply for this, then you get it annually, but you have to reapply every year for it. And you have to be one of the first to apply for it to get it.
Well,
No,
to
the
be
30
reimbursed.
is for the reimbursement.
Yeah, that's for the reimbursement.
Oh, so that's the sum total of the
Yeah, everybody gets the 4,100 or whatever every year stipend. But to get reimbursed, that's what a lot of teachers are hesitant, because they don't want to do it unless they're going to be reimbursed. And they're unclear, well, is it too many? Is it not? Am I in that window?
Yeah, or who's first?
Yeah, and
So
so
now
I think it might be good to be transparent about that.
I'm a little muddled. So $750. I'm a national board certified teacher, and I apply for this, and I get $750 as an annual reimbursement. Do I get that every year?
Stipend. So there's two parts. The one you get for having it, for meeting the qualification, that's your stipend, that's ongoing.
That's ongoing. So I would get, once I apply through you, I would get that every year.
You have to apply every year.
I have to apply every year.
Right.
And that's where the first come, first serve comes in?
No, that's the reimbursement.
The reason there's an application process is not every year, and if I can talk to the TSSP portion of it, because that's also a piece of it, you may not be teaching a full course load of mathematics classes or science classes. So in the application of it, you may be receiving a ratio of that appropriation. So with that piece. Now with the National Board Certified, you're not teaching any portion of National Board Certified, so you would receive
Actually,
that.
you could be.
You could be teaching part-time.
You could be, because you could
part-time, yes, okay.
Yeah, or you could be teaching, like I said, you could have it in math, but also be teaching some science classes. Your national board certification is in a particular area.
That's
Okay.
where it could change.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't
And
know
then
that.
receiving, and Darren, you actually gave us information on this, Darren Nelson, Assistant Superintendent of Student Achievement Student Learning, which is that they get the most. So they couldn't be and let's really clarify on this, so if I'm saying this wrong, anyone jump in, which is you can't receive the reimbursement for being a national board certified math endorsed teacher teaching in a Title I school. You wouldn't receive all three of those.
Yeah, you get the
Right,
highest.
you get the highest
of
of the one you qualify for.
Okay.
And so
would that be the $4,100?
yes.
Yeah,
that's
they
your-
were in that category.
So would it be clear, this is just in the spirit of like processing, so it would be clear to teachers and everyone else if there were two separate rules?
One for national board, one
Yeah.
for TSSP.
Is there a necessary, is it helpful other than just economy of rules to have one rule?
Well, in essence, it's all part of one rule, but there is the whole section that's just about reimbursement. I mean, starting from line 86 on, that section is only about reimbursement. So in essence, having two rules would just pull that out and make it its own rule, so I'm not sure. And probably I've confused you, is what I'm afraid of.
No.
I know.
I think it's just a lot of information
Pieces.
from this set and this and this and reimbursements and stipends and
So the reimbursement is not guaranteed. That's the piece that's in here is there's a set amount of
and
money.
that's the part that I would like more clarity
Right.
and
And I-
transparency,
and
even
I-
in the application process.
And I'm trying to understand why it's not guaranteed when the TTSP is guaranteed.
There probably isn't a problem.
Right.
But, so we have a pretty good idea of how many math endorsed people there are, how many people there are teaching these different courses. We have no idea how many people might be interested in applying
You said
for
that.
this.
What if hundreds?
Yes. I mean, all of a sudden, people could say, hey, it's being
It's going to
paid
be
for.
paid for.
I mean, that's when I did mine, is when the board was paying for it. I was like, hey, it's paid for, this is my chance.
Right.
You know, and so if people come out of the woodwork, we might not have enough. If the fiscal note that we put in, based on the 30 per year, is what it continues to be, then we're fine.
I see.
But you have people
said that
who
at
have
the
never been
beginning.
interested before that I know who are
be.
suddenly interested.
Right.
And what if we all came forward?
Yeah.
But that's where it'd be nice to know.
Okay. Lisa?
Okay, so the reimbursement portion, when you're referring to not knowing how many are available, but they're all distributed at the same time. It's just you don't know how many are going to apply. And how do you have a specific window of time that people are allowed to apply, or is it just open all year?
There's a specific window.
Okay.
So we would be able to open that application and then shut it down so that nobody would be applying for something that's
Right,
not.
so you could
Okay,
just
that's a-
say, yeah, it's open until, but you'd have to have a very good algorithm to make sure it cuts off
Yes.
right at the right time.
Yeah.
Um,
And we do have one specialist who is dedicated just to this program.
okay, because I think that would be
Who is that?
beneficial.
Jane Conway.
Okay.
I mean, because even if we wrote into the rule just somewhere as, just to let people know that it is limited,
I guess it does
because,
say.
yeah. So,
It does say it.
it does.
just-
But now if I knew that.
and then I was going to ask what Carol said about splitting it up, not in two separate rules, but just being very explicit that in the language that these are from two separate programs.
So would you like me to take the rule back then to Ben and Jane and do some work on it and then bring it back again next month? I'm kind of getting the sense that you're not
some
feeling
better
confident.
clarity.
I think so.
And I'm wondering, let's go back to, I want to go back to Sarah Jones' question here about the lines. If this is 83, if the appropriation for TSSP is insufficient to cover all eligible teachers, so these are just the teachers who qualify for TSSP, be they national board certified or not. So that's that one pot of money. Insufficient to cover all eligible teachers entitled to awards, the superintendent shall reduce all awards by the same ratio and proportion, and applications filed in accordance with section -4, which is just below it, will not receive reimbursement. So, yes, so what that means is that they cannot get both if they're nationally board certified.
They get biased.
and
Get the
qualify
highest
as,
amounts.
I think
that
you're
is,
right.
that is confusion.
But you could just write that they get the highest.
So
Well, I think
Or
this part
cabinet.
is about if there's not enough money, the TSSP is the priority, the reimbursement is not.
See, that's what that's the heart of my question.
Yeah.
What in the law says that should get priority?
It's just our attempt to deal with this potential problem of having 100 applicants and
Which is
not
only
having the money.
potential, right.
And then we have to reduce the TSSP. And so now all of the already nationally board certified teachers aren't going to get their full stipend.
See,
So
that's,
it's a matter of
that's
really
really
that's why I
muddy.
say it's
If
up
there
to
are
you.
two
It's your
separate
priority.
pots of
But
money.
aren't they separate pots of money, so that's confusing to me.
It's
Not
like
for
a,
the national
and
board.
it's like a
TSSP
catch-22
part.
that's what I was trying to ask you
Okay,
before, and you
So
said
Chair
it better.
Cannon, I'm
Superintendent,
gonna, Tiffany Stanley, our policy advisor, to come up, may have some more information on this and then moving it forward to go back and perhaps work on this, because there does seem to be a lot of questions regarding this, and maybe there even needs to be an FAQ at some point, because the questions that we're having are some that everyone will have.
Yep.
Everything can't be written into the rule, because then it becomes even more muddy.
Yes.
But to have that basic piece there that provides those guardrails that are in there to answer specifically these questions, and then to have some examples of situations.
Yes.
I'm a teacher who's this and this and this. What would I do to make it applicable so that teachers have that friendly format of being able
So
to access
long as,
information?
before, sorry to interrupt Tiffany, but this has kind of come up before, and I just want to, so long as the FAQ doesn't go beyond the rule. I sometimes worry that law is made through, I like them too, but I don't like them to supplant or replace or
go beyond.
change essentially the rule. That's
Absolutely, and I
want-
think that there's a language that comes with rules and with statutes that many of our educators aren't aware of. For example, not because they're highly educated, but there's different meanings of words when written in law. For example, shall and may, and the different things that go along with that. So the interpretation of those is very specific to legal speak, and if we could have that then translated into everyday language.
Tiffany, you just walked in and we're dumping this in your lap. Let me give you just a little bit about where we are. So we're talking about the TSSP and the National Board Certification Reimbursement. We've gotten ourselves to a point where we understand that there are two separate pots of money that flow into these two separate programs. We are toying with the idea of sending this rule back and asking for two rules, one that applies to TSSP and one that applies to National Board Certification, to more or less clarify this. And the thing that's really giving us problems are these lines about who does and who will not receive reimbursement and that kind of thing. So that's more or less where we are. You poor soul, you've walked right.
No, it's okay. So Tiffany Stanley, State Board of Education Policy Advisor. So my background on this is I was involved in drafting the rule on the National Board Certification reimbursement before the TSSP sections were added to it. I do think there is flexibility, and it is a policy call to decide whether to treat these as two separate pots of money. That was how the first draft was, that was how the existing rule was envisioned, where after the bill passed, they estimated the number of National Board Certified teachers and appropriated an amount of money to cover that, and it was like that $88,000 that you see in there that was struck out. So you could treat that as this is that separate pot of money, and if there are more National Board Certified teachers, you could prorate and then treat the TSSP pot of money as a separate pot of money. So I wasn't sure what my question was.
Yeah.
Why was the decision made to lump them all together and prioritize the others over the National Board Certified?
Let me ask Dr. Jones, would that make better clarity for teachers, do you think?
Yeah, actually, Sarah Jones, UEA. If I can just give you a little bit of background about this, it might help you decide if you want two different rules or not. I too worked with Representative Ellison on this bill in 2016, and when it was passed and we publicized far and wide that, hey, this is a great new benefit for teachers and an incentive to get your national board certification, I heard from a lot of national board certified teachers saying, I don't think I qualify because I'm not a math or science teacher.
Okay.
And they assumed that because in the code, it's under the teacher salary supplement program section of code, that there's a term called an eligible teacher. That's the TSSAP teacher, and there's a certificate teacher, also in that same section of code. And many teachers thought I had to be both. I had to be nationally board certified and math or science, and I explained, no, there's two different definitions. So it might clarify a rule if you actually treated them separately, and then teachers wouldn't have that confusion about who qualifies for which piece.
And then we could have a proportional across the both groups, not
within those pots of money instead of getting it muddy.
But I do think the issue that's been brought up by several of you is very real in that if you preserve the reimbursement, which people have an anticipation and expectation they're going to be reimbursed, and the stipend is lowered, that's also it's a catch-22 of how to word that appropriately.
Yeah.
So we would need direction from you on which way you would want us to go. Do we guarantee the reimbursement at the risk of lowering the stipend, or do we guarantee the stipend at the risk of lowering the reimbursement, or do we just lower everything proportionally?
Would be my druthers.
That would be my druthers too.
If I had to say, I would say you don't lower the stipend, you just let people know that we can only do this many, the application closes after 30 or whatever. And then you get on because to me it's like, oh, I can do it the next year.
I agree.
And then you're guaranteed the stipend, but then it's like, oh, I didn't make the cut this year, I'll try again next year.
And you are out of pocket.
And then it's clear.
You are out of pocket for the.
Would it be a scholarship that you could actually apply for to get that, and then you know you received it?
So
and then we could maintain
it's just,
the stipend.
And that's what I've heard from teachers, like, oh, if I can get in the window, because that's how it's being perceived. Like, I think there's so many, but I don't know if I made the cut.
And that is how it's drafted on 101 through 104.
Yeah.
First come, first served.
Yes.
Don't make it. Yeah.
So
but
if they know going into it.
Yeah, but if they apply and it's like, oh, this window's closed, we've received our applicants, try again next year, I'll put you on a waiting list.
And then don't we request, sorry, Chair. And just a question. Don't we go back to the legislature and say, like, every year, right? So if we're way under, they'll consider appropriating more.
I think it would be clear for the legislators too if we had two different rules and they knew which pool they were looking at. Okay, did you?
No, just, I don't know.
Okay, so I think what will you take direction from the committee to send this back and ask for two separate rules to govern the two pots of money? And I think you've gotten some good input from Board Member Gravitt about how to handle having to reduce those and offering your window of 30 national board certified and so forth. Will you bring that to us next?
Yes, of course.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diana. Okay. So, Tiffany, we're going to keep you up here. And we are going to go back to item 3.3, which is
School grade.
School grading.
Accountability system.
Okay.
Okay.
I have accountability system and school grading system in here.
Yes.
So anyway, I guess they're one and the same thing. We're being joined by Anne Michelle Neal from the state office. Thank you for joining us. And we'll turn to you, to Anne Michelle, to present this to us.
Sure. Do a brief introduction.
Yes, you could.
Go ahead. Okay. This is a discussion item where we're trying to really have a robust discussion and think of some things that we haven't in the past. Alternative education has been something at USBE longstanding, really trying to decide what is the definition for alternative education, what schools are alternative schools, and what does it mean, how do we support them, and then now we have this next leg, which is in the accountability system. What does it mean? How do they calculate into the accountability system? And currently they have their own report card or accountability system, and there's some people that we have around the table as well. So we have Kathleen Chronister from Mountain High Davis School District, who's also the president of the association.
Kathleen, would you like to join us?
And we have Dr. Christelle Estrada, who's really up on all of this as well, who's helping all of our population of students to be with this. And so this was meant to be a discussion item, not a debate, not a right or a wrong, but it's really to inform and as part of this discussion to be able to say with some people who are really on the ground, boots on the ground, interacting with this population of students, what might some of these decisions be in moving forward, and how would they really impact the students, educators, administrators, families in achieving these goals that are set forth. So we're starting maybe with some background from Anna Michelle.
Okay, I'm Anna Michelle Neal. I'm the accountability specialist at USBE here. Thank you for having me. So just some background in what we've been doing. We have a standard accountability system that applies to all schools. It's been based in proficiency and growth and college readiness. And then we have a separate set of alternative criteria for alternative schools for accountability that it's focused on growth, things like school climate surveys, credit earning, attainment, which is alternate forms of graduation, and also improvements in attendance. So we have these two separate systems for schools that are identified as alternative schools. I wanted to look deeply at what kind of schools alternative schools are, these schools that we have categorized as alternative schools, because I think we create a picture or have an assumption of what those schools look like. And so I did some analysis of the schools that we have identified as alternative. What I found is that we have two categories of alternative schools. One that serves primarily a special ed population, and then a set of schools that serve students at risk and focuses on things like credit recovery. Most of the schools are special education schools, but 26 are those alternative settings, mostly high school students. Of those alternative schools, there are 4 that are schools of choice, which means that they are have some sort of open enrollment. There are 2 charter schools and 2 public high schools that allow open enrollment. 5 schools are exclusively for students who are youth in state custody, and the other 17 are schools that LEAs refer students to attend because of various concerns for them being at risk. In special education, the bulk of those schools are preschools. We have Utah School for Deaf and Blind. We have 4 schools that focus on post-secondary transition for students with severe disabilities that are past 12th grade, and 7 schools that serve students exclusively that have severe cognitive disabilities. As far as accountability goes, the alternative schools category, those 26 schools, are largely the topic of conversation that we are having today. So we asked questions like how and why were they established? The purpose of having an alternative accountability system is to have a more equitable system for schools that serve special populations of students. The process for identifying these schools is frankly a mystery. I think it's been inconsistent over time. There was a period of time where schools just self-selected. They said, we want to be an alternative school. Then there was a I think, a period where they had to apply for alternative status, but presently the board has been unable to arrive at a definition of what an alternative school is. Should it be a school of choice? Should it be a placement where LAs place students and refer students to attend? That excludes charter schools, so that's problematic in creating a definition. Challenges in this current approach are that this exemption for alternative schools is no longer allowable under Senate Bill 220. There are also some perverse incentives for creating an alternative location where we can send particular groups of students, and they are then excluded or hidden in the accountability system. Schools are not held accountable for meeting the needs of students who are highly at risk. Like I mentioned, we have no clear definition for what alternative schools are. The first attempt was to focus on that referral process, but like I said, that excludes charter schools because they may serve alternative populations, but there is no LEA to refer them to their own school. Exempting schools from school grading also exempts them from school improvement identification. So they don't receive a letter grade, they aren't identified in for school turnaround or extra supports for school improvement, which may be an advantage for those particular populations of students. Also, ESSA requires that all public schools be included in the accountability system and system of identification for improvement.
So if we can go back to just that slide really quick, that this is the huge issue, or this is the huge discussion point, which is the exemption language is no longer permitted. And so they're in the two different accountability systems. We're not doing that. So that's the big crux of this discussion and the reason we have everyone in the room today. So I just want to make sure that there's a strong need and timely discussion that needs to occur today. So that's just make sure we're all.
So currently we have the school grading system for everyone and then an alternative school grading system for this group. And we've got to figure out how to bring them together.
Yes.
So the questions that we're bringing to the committee are several options that we've considered for how we can do this. The first is that we include schools that we have been considered alternative in the accountability system in the same way that all other schools are. The advantages to this thinking is that there's a growth emphasis, and I'll show you a kind of a picture of our accountability system moving forward next. But this growth emphasis, I think, is more equitable for schools that serve students with diverse populations. It addresses those perverse incentives of hiding students in an alternate location. The inequities, there are inequities that exist between small rural school districts that don't have the means to create an alternative school. So we want to create this equitable system. And it also removes the need to create this definition and application process or procedure for identifying an alternative school because they are treated just like every other school. Some considerations are that schools where there are small N sizes for assessment, those schools don't receive an overall letter grade because certain indicators require a minimum N size, and when an indicator isn't present, the entire point system as a whole, those schools don't receive an overall grade. That's a technicality.
Just how many would fall into that, having too low an N number? Would that affect a bunch of students?
Almost all.
So then maybe it isn't.
When I looked at it, I found 6 schools that have N sizes less than 10 in the alternative system.
6 of the 26.
6 of the 26. And those are largely because they have 11th graders and 12th graders. 11th grade, SAGE was optional, and 12th graders generally don't take SAGE, only if they have a course that triggers a test. So this is the revised accountability system that we have moving forward. We've worked really hard to create a single system, and I think that thinking is important when we consider alternative schools as well.
Yeah, so just Tiffany Stanley, policy advisor. So some of the policies around creating an alternative system for alternative high schools were enacted at a time where the accountability system for all schools was quite different. So it's just making the point that the accountability system has changed. So we may need to look at whether alternative high schools may fit into this new accountability system a little bit better than they did in the past. So it's things like not having to achieve all 4 college readiness benchmarks on the ACT. It's a composite score of 18. It's skewed towards growth. High school graduation will include a small piece for the 5-year graduation rate. And then there's the advanced coursework piece, which includes CTE, which and credit earning there. So if that could help.
And I found good data on participation in CTE courses in these alternative schools. That's typically something that these schools offer and emphasize.
And do you know what? Even with my glasses, I cannot read very well. I can read growth.
Could you send it to Sherry and she can upload it for us to do that right now? You can just take a question while you're looking at it.
Kathleen.
I was part of that original plan where we put together an alternative accountability system. Part of the committee that did that. The reason that I'd like to ask a question. Proficiency and growth are both measured still the same way, and that's half of the score, which means you're going to be at 50%, where you're not going to have any numbers for the majority of these schools. So again, you're getting no data. So it's not giving us anything we can go with and make improvement on, because our kids are not participating in those SAGE tests. So it doesn't give us any information for school improvement. Right now, the system we have does give us good information for school improvement. And we do all have school improvement plans, and we are all held accountable by whether it's our school improvement plan in our district or it's trust plans, whatever it might be. We have to report this data from our accountability system. So if you move us into this traditional look, you're going to, again, have no growth and no proficiency scores, which gives us no data about what we really do to help kids. And that is improving attendance, improving credit earning, and moving them towards graduation on time. Those are the things that and school climate, those are the things that we are designed to do and to do well and held accountable for currently in our accountability system. So moving us into this traditional setting, again, eliminates those things that we fought so hard to say, this is what we do, hold us accountable for what our mission is.
Okay, Tiffany.
So just a couple points to clarify. So SB 220, the state law, does allow for the state to adjust weightings and include different indicators for schools that serve special student populations. That old language used to be that schools can be exempted if they requested, and then no. So that exemption language is what's off the table, but there is, yes, flexibility in adjusting. Now, ESSA requires that all public schools be included in the accountability system unless a determination cannot be made. So that's the issue right here, where half of the score in a lot of cases may drop out. And rather than just let it drop out and let all these schools drop out of the system, and then we're in a worse situation than we are now. Right. The discussion maybe around how do we replace those proficiency scores for these schools when that determination can't be made. And there may be flexibility in both laws to allow us to do some things like that. So to put back in credit earning or attendance, those types of things to replace that 50%. But those other pieces may stay.
Okay, Elisa.
So I think we should focus on the state law portion, not the ESSA portion, and find the most valuable data there and use the measures that are actually good indicators. And as far as the ESSA, I know we were talking offline about Colorado's attempt at just the opt-out rate, where they turned in two different systems, one for the ESSA just to meet the requirement, and the other, that was meaningless data ultimately. Anyways, and we could do a similar thing here. Everyone knows I'm not an ESSA cohort or fan, but anyway.
Yeah.
But you could do a similar thing, but focus on what's valuable here instead of what someone else is asking for that doesn't have any meaning for us.
Right. Or we could adjust the percentages to show what we value.
Right.
Yeah.
And some of the challenges with creating the two different sets is that there are still actions that are required to be taken federally, and so then these schools could get swept up into things that don't make sense for them to get swept up in by having those two. So hopefully we can avoid having to bifurcate the systems, but
We're just getting everyone up onto Word docs.
Yeah, so Anne Michelle's presentation is now on Word Docs. So you need to refresh and then go back in.
I was going to ask for it anyways.
And now it's serious.
I'm like, how am I going to remember as we're having this discussion?
And go to 3.3.
Right.
And here it is, alternative school considerations. Ah, this is so much easier. So Kathleen, it sounds like you helped put together this academic growth, school climate, credit earning, improved attendance. Those were the things you were focusing on. I recognize those as things that are critical for success. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So if we were to change the percentages to meet the ESSA requirement, what does that look like at the state level? Does it water down the efficacy of what you've been doing? Because now we're changing percentages to meet someone else's guideline, when what is valuable here are the indicators that you mentioned. And so if we're changing the percentages, then it may look more poorly done than what's valuable to those students. I'm thinking of some of the school closures that we've seen lately, and most of those were in the charter world, but the students in those schools, they weren't looking for a high SAGE test score. They were looking for a location that they felt safe. I'm thinking of the school for teen pregnant moms or whatever.
Could I just tell you, the Utah Alternative Association has put together our attempt of defining an alternative public school. We did not include the charter on purpose because they have a different mission than a public alternative high school. But here's who we serve, and I've got copies if anybody would like this, but maybe just
pass it out to us, would you?
Yeah, and it took us about 4 months to come up with this. This is the board on the left, but this basically says that we are part of a district's comprehensive dropout intervention and prevention program. We address needs of students who are not succeeding in a traditional school environment. We provide targeted instruction that increases student credit earning rates towards graduation. We partner with community entities to provide a continuum of services with the focus of preparing students for life after high school. Characteristics of an alternative school learning environment may include flexible scheduling, small student-teacher ratios, college career-oriented themes, adult advocates, trauma sensitivity, and academic enrichment. Students who may benefit from alternative education include re-engaged learners, students needing additional mental health support, individuals at risk of not successfully transitioning into adulthood, teen pregnant and parenting students, and students with disciplinary infractions. That's who we serve.
To me, and I don't know, it seems to me that the main purpose, and the kids I know that have gone to an alternative school, when you think about climate, when you think about attendance, the goal is graduation. You want to get them there. And maybe you increase the percentage of the high school graduation becomes more important than 11% in an alternative setting because they're there, they're learning skills, and maybe even CTE. I'm just thinking you could do some adjustment with what do we value? Do we care as much about ACT? I don't know. Are they going to be taking SAGE tests or whatever tests? Maybe we increase the percentage on we want to get them graduated. Maybe that's most important. I don't know.
And I think of what's in statute allowing for additional indicators.
Yeah.
It let me pull up the language. I have it right here. It says other indicators in addition to the indicators described. So I think things like GED could count as completion.
Yeah.
And that could count as part of the graduation indicator. Or a different point distribution is allowed.
Yeah. And I kind of came in midstream, so I apologize. But my concern, and I very much appreciate what the alternative education people have taken on because it's something that I know that the educators have wrestled with for 20 years. So thank you for that. But I think somehow we've got to find a way to include data collection from alternative schools, but also with charter schools. Because A, I want charter schools to be accountable, and B, there are some less mainstream charter schools that probably should fit in this definition. So I think, and I don't want 3 or 4 different kind of categories of schools. So I think we've got to find some way to take this very thoughtful, good language and apply it to non-mainstream charter schools.
Yep, and this was a little bit before my time, but I've been told that one of the huge challenges with the way that the old structure was set up where schools come and seek an exemption has been that some of those charter schools would come forward, and basically it led to a lot of schools coming forward and saying, hey,
they want to all be alternative.
I also serve, and some of them have very good points, so it becomes a kind of a floodgate that, and because they could never quite figure out the definition,
But we've got to because I'm not going to let all the charter schools off the hook, but I definitely think that there are different kinds of schools that need different, and whether it's percentages or something, and even if the lines aren't perfect, I think we've got to draw them and include them and get some data.
Dr. Estrada.
Yeah, so my experience with alternative schools in California, we actually started an alternative school, and it's still running after 25 years. And the focus is really on an equitable way in which quality instruction happens for all students, right? It's not just because, the typical system of a comprehensive high school might not work for certain students based on particular conditions or whatever that is. So for me, the biggest commitment is to ensure, and I really agree with you, Board Member Lear, in relationship to every single school has to be accountable for quality instruction for each student. That's what educational equity stands for. That's what the strategic plan is about. I also think that districts have to be held accountable for the way in which they refer students. And I'll just say this, there are some districts whose tendency is to refer students before SAGE testing. Or
After the October 1 count.
after the October 1 count. Or at the end of the school year, not notifying parents. Okay, so it's pretty clear that those kinds of behaviors, if we had a system that was very transparent and very clear about an accountability system that includes all of our schools for each child in Utah, that values family and parent and community, then we could come up with something that would do that. And we have amazing educators in alternative schools who are incredibly committed to family and to community. And then the question is, as far as the data go, you know, how is a quality education providing them for career? When we had the alternative school, we had internships, we had career opportunities, we had, you know, individualized learning plans, we had contracts with students and their families, and families were very engaged because they were included instead of being isolated with comprehensive high schools, you know, who don't really have that kind of capacity for many reasons of enrollment of 2,000 kids or 1,500 kids. So that's kind of my commitment to the strategic plan and the board. The comments about educational equity and quality instruction included in a complete system that's transparent but really focuses on other indicators that value what students and families bring that doesn't typically fit into a comprehensive high school.
So Dr. Estrada and Dr. Chronister have made some very, very good points that kind of lead to the crux of this. So just to give a little bit more background to be able to focus this and move it forward, the Utah Alternative Education Association was just formed last year. And and if I may say this part is, we don't have support here or a staff member assigned here for alternative schools. So the attempt was made to be able to then form their own support system in moving this forward. Dr. Chronister has been very good with meeting with USBE throughout this past year and moving this definition backwards and forwards, because we were trying to do the same thing of how would you identify, what definition would you have? And the point that Dr. Estrada makes is probably at the crux of this entire conversation, which is not the school itself, but if we take a step back and we say, how is a student identified to go to this school? And many of the students, and I've been to Mountain High many times, one of my favorite places to go, and in going there, these students would honestly say they self-select because the boundary school is not meeting their needs for whatever reason that is. And that's actually in statute, and it's in our rule that states the needs of the student in academic achievement. And the students find themselves to be successful. We can't have the assumption be that students attend an alternative school because they are academic failures. That should not be the assumption that is being made. Right. And because what is the graduation rate at your school?
96%.
96%. And so when we're saying this, I think that we need to keep in mind that the idea that the school serves a purpose to meet the needs of students, and sometimes that is self-identified, but if in the accountability, the process of being held accountable, how it's accountable for the way in which they refer students, and that was the words I typed down that you said. How is a child placed there, referred there? What is that process? So in a charter school, they're not referred by an LEA, they would be referred by their charter for another charter. So is there a charter? That's where the complexity comes in. And so that's one issue that needs to be resolved within the definition. And so right now, going back to what Anne Michelle said in the very beginning, which is They were identified in the beginning by self-selection. So on this list, you'll see some schools right now where you're like, why would that school be on this list? And then there's some that probably should be on this list that aren't on this list because how are they put on this list now? And so we have a list of schools that are on this list for multiple reasons that are not consistent. We have an accountability system that is different for these schools for a specific reason. But if we go back to the crux of this conversation, we're not going to be able to solve all of those things today, which is why we're here for this discussion. To be able to make sure that any decision that is made, that there aren't repercussions or unintended consequences because of the decision that's made. So this is a bigger thing than just for today. For today, part of the decision is with an accountability system where we have 2 accountability systems. It's the next slide in Anne Michelle's PowerPoint. So I'm wondering maybe if we can get through those next 2 slides so that we have the full options that may be available and add to some that the committee has then just come up with, for example, with the GED counting as completion, what is the school referral, some of those things that we can add to then have a better answer in the end. So Michelle, is that appropriate?
Yes, sure. Okay, that's fine. Some other ideas that we've thrown around are adjusting the graduation rate indicator, including those additional indicators that apply to alternative schools such as GED and alternative diploma, adjusting the graduation rate. If the school is alternative, we consider additional points of data if they are. This point applies if the school is identified for school turnaround or school improvement. If they are alternative and we use the same system, then we just look at additional pieces of information before, I guess, identifying them for improvement or turnaround. That's a model that comes from Oregon that we really liked. We also had the discussion of assigning student performance to the student's boundary school or the school that referred the student to the alternative school. It addresses those perverse incentives of why schools refer students to alternative settings, but also LEAs will have issue with being held accountable for instruction that they did not deliver.
So yes and no. They delivered the majority of the instruction. I get them midway through their senior year. So my kids when they come with a SAGE score from their junior year at a previous high school, but I'm held accountable for that SAGE score. So it works both ways.
Yeah. Well, just add the other thing is that when kids come. Like if there's an alternative school and it's 6 through 12, their reading level was determined by the previous schools in the district. And so the alternative schools have to make up for what didn't happen in their previous. So
it works both ways.
Yeah.
Yes. And we're okay with that.
So might be a more
survival
option than we previously considered.
Yeah.
Those are great. Thank you. There's some important implications. We're halfway through the school year, and if we make a decision to hold schools accountable under the standard accountability system, those schools need to know. These alternative schools need to know what system they're going to be held accountable under. We have built into place an alert year for identification. So if alternative schools are held accountable under the standard statewide system, and they fall in the lowest 3 to 5% and are identified for school improvement, this year would act as their alert year. So they wouldn't go immediately into school improvement. It's not a death sentence. They have a year of notice. We are required to describe our system or our plan in the state plan that we have to submit February 14th. There is the option for the board to not assign school grades for fall of 2018, and that may also lessen the impact of holding previously or current alternative schools accountable under this standard system.
So Kathleen, can I ask for your response to what Anne Michelle just said? What would be best for you in terms of looking at dates and being on notice and that kind of thing?
Well, if you determine that alternative schools are going to be held accountable for those at the same percentages that you are every traditional school, we will all be in school improvement. We will all be at schools, because that's what we were before. That's when I wrote to Senator Niederhauser and said, this makes no sense.
Yeah.
Because you're not honoring our mission. You know, why would anyone want to send their kid to a failing school? Yet we have kids that want to come to our school because they can graduate. Because we don't care about stage scores. Did I say that? Because I don't, and my kids don't, because it doesn't mean anything to them.
So what do you?
So if the growth and proficiency are only designed to look at those stage scores, we will always be less than 50% if you keep those percentages the way they are.
Well, so what's our job? I'm trying to still figure out. Do you want us to tell you to come up with a definition? Is that what we're supposed to do?
Yeah. You were going to say something in response to
Give us something manageable to do.
I
don't want to talk about this anymore.
That's how I feel. Let's see if I can.
Manageable.
So, just to clarify one point, which is that if you can't generate a score for an indicator, you don't get a 0 for it. It either drops out completely and then you don't get a score at all.
Right.
Or it drops out and then we readjust the points, but you don't get an F. You would just drop out of the system.
And by dropping out of the system, it becomes invisible.
Right, which is what we would want to avoid.
Yeah.
So
then you just marginalized a marginalized population.
Exactly what we don't want to do. Right. Exactly. So we're sort of in a catch-22 there.
Yeah.
So that's our task.
Yes. So we do need direction at some point, and it may be to get a larger working group together, and also to dig into the data, because it was really helpful to dig into the data of the current alternative schools and to see that, yes, N sizes are an issue for proficiency, but then to also see that, you know, some of the measures that have been included, like attendance, there's not a lot of differentiation, and that's something that you want to see in an accountability system is differentiation. Otherwise, it's just a dummy indicator. So that's something that we'll want to look at and ensure that, And then the other thing that you see is look at the graduation rates. Like, my takeaway is that these schools are, it's our definition again, these schools are not all created equal. So Youth Educational Support School, 15% graduation rate. Lighthouse High, 99%. This is your 4-year cohort graduation rate. Like, these schools, we can't lump them all together, even though we have right now. Right. So we really need to examine what's going on here.
Well, for instance, I've got another alternative school that I'm responsible for. I have all the youth in custody programs, adult ed, Mountain High. I'm responsible for all of those. Another one of our programs, a school, is called Renaissance Academy. Those are for safe school kids, and they're there for short term. They're there for behavior intervention, and then they return back to the regular setting. So you're never going to see good scores at that school, ever. You're never going to see good graduation rates. You're never going to see that because they're there for a different purpose. That's why special purpose school was a catch-all, because everyone has a different look and a different reason for serving that population within their LEAs.
And some of them are alternative schools because they serve a special population,
Correct.
sort of like Renaissance. But
Correct.
you know, Spectrum Academy that serves 70%, 80% autistic kids is also a special purpose school, self-selected.
Interestingly, not alternative.
Yeah, but it just seems like the same standards shouldn't apply to Spectrum Academy as applied as Skyline High School.
And so I think what might be helpful is to get a sense from this committee maybe of which options sound most palatable, and really what we could do is, there's 3 or 4 options, take them to different groups and get their input over the next month or so.
But what are the options?
So because we need to either continue the current practice, which we can't really, because SB 220 doesn't really allow the exemption language. So we need to determine what the alternative weightings or indicators are, just to enact a revised school accountability rule, which we need to do yesterday because we're halfway through the school year. But this has been kind of the issue that has been hanging it all up. So it's really revising the accountability rule and ensuring that everybody's, that's a big urgency.
That's kind of our big overall.
Exactly, yes. And then in the background is the ESSA, but so some of those options, so how do we handle alternative schools in the accountability system is the key question, and some of those options that we can bring.
So on the slide that Ann Michelle gave us, she has alternative schools and special education schools. Do we need to hear from special education schools on this also? So we've got a couple of people here representing alternative schools, but I imagine the special education people would really like to weigh in on this also.
Yeah, we did. What we saw there was actually similar, but we didn't realize how similar it was until we looked at the data, that a lot of these schools fall out because of small line sizes, because they take the alternative assessment.
They're preschool or post-secondary, largely.
Yeah, that's right. Special ed is largely preschool here. Yeah.
36 out of 50 are preschool, 34 out of 50 are preschool or post-secondary.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, there was like a handful.
For schools that serve students with severe disabilities, the majority of those students take the DLM or the UA, and that test doesn't provide us with a growth score. So half of the accountability system doesn't get a score, so they essentially don't get a grade, but we would report on the indicators that we do have for those schools.
So if one option that even seems somewhat feasible is assign it to the sending school, which is what some states do.
I didn't hear that.
Assign the student performance to the sending school. With charter schools, that would be something we would need to work through, how that would.
Yeah, I don't like that. No, that doesn't work for me.
Okay.
But that's just me. I mean, I think the point that was made over here about shouldn't be that the alternative school shouldn't take responsibility for the former school and vice versa. That just doesn't work. So what other choices do we have?
Well, what's option C?
Yeah. Can we just come up with a list of indicators that are valuable?
Well, and that's the alternative accountability system that we have in place. So one option would be to merge those and just rather than
change the weight, the percentage weight.
Exactly. So have it be much more closely aligned to the accountability system for all schools, but find work on that 50% that's SAGE, and fill that out with attainment and
things like credit earning and improved attendance. We can add indicators.
And the rationale there is that we cannot produce a score for, and so if they have N sizes smaller, they may end up in the traditional, or bigger, sorry, they may end up in the traditional, but for those that have N sizes that aren't sufficient, we would adjust the weightings and include other indicators, because we can't produce a score. Right.
But it doesn't, did you want to say
we don't want them to convince.
Well, this isn't related directly to what you're saying, but I just keep thinking of another indicator, because you talked about graduation rates, GED, and that you also mentioned that a lot of the kids in alternative school have a high emphasis in the CTE programs. And my understanding is a lot of those have certificates of completion for just those. So is that when you say Certificate of completion, are you talking about individual programs?
No, certificate of completion is something.
Yeah, it's in the new accountability system, actually.
So
that would
could
be
you
under the
take
advanced.
to show their achievements? So you have students that are, you know, working really hard and learning skills, you know, but maybe they didn't graduate, but they have learned a skill that's valuable. Why not?
And that's part of the attainment piece right now, is that if we get points in our system for transitioning kids to the used to be the UCAT system, or into adult ed, or into, so there's points for transitioning, but it's only half the amount of graduation. So
I just don't know that I believe that it should be worth half the amount. But that's just
we can relook at all of those things. It's been a while.
Because they're achieving something that's taking them somewhere.
And achieving the certificate is part of that advanced.
But she said it's different than a certificate for a CTE program.
Is it?
Maybe she misunderstood my question.
Being a CTE pathway completer falls into that advanced coursework indicator already. So I think that's a great advantage in the new system that is a strength for alternative schools. I think also growth as low as 25%. English learner progress in those schools might be excellent. You know, those kinds of, I think there are indicators that are good and beneficial for alternative schools in the system as it's written. And I think the way students can demonstrate growth in an alternative school might be also beneficial.
How would that look other than the SAGE score? What is the difference then? Because we're not going to make that number. Our insides will always be too small in the school that only serves 11th and 12th.
And one thing that I'm hearing clearly, and then Dr. Strada, you have something as well. One thing I'm hearing clearly is the accountability system for all is set here, which does not work for the alternative schools. One is they'll probably not receive a score in all areas, therefore they'll become invisible. And our alternative schools, with Kathleen representing them, is saying we don't want to be invisible. We would like to have an accountability system. We would like to be able to show the work that we're doing and the growth that our students and the accomplishments they are achieving. So then if we move that to the next level, SB 220, we can no longer have it the way that it is. So then we have some alternatives for change, and that's where we're at now. And so right now we have 4 options within the PowerPoint, and I kind of put them all on one page. But Dr. Estrada, before we kind of go to those options, to say during this committee, here's what we can accomplish today. Outside of this committee, perhaps maybe Chair Cannon to say a work group, depending on what it is the committee decides, to delve more deeply into alternative schools altogether with more questions that need to be asked and answered.
You know, I think ultimately it's a bigger question. It goes back to this idea of proficiency in academic content, which is something that Title III kind of got dinged on, which is interesting because if you look at the gap between English learners on the SAGE scores, there are some comprehensive high schools that actually have the highest graduation rate for ELs, but because of the SAGE score, they ended up being designated as an F. So I'm kind of focusing on this broader idea about what we consider growth, because I know for teachers, I'm just saying as a teacher, that growth is really important. It is. And even the EL indicator focuses on annual growth toward a long-term goal, which ends up providing the kind of data for changed instruction that's more concrete. So I think in general, we have to think about, you know, the kind of indicators that make the most sense for high quality instruction and provides information for teachers and administrators to design programs that fit kids, not kids fitting into a program. Yes. So your idea about, you know, kids that end up going back to their regular school, I think that's a pretty significant indicator, because I actually know some schools, when kids do well in alternative schools, aren't accepted back into their comprehensive high school, even though the family and kids want them. So all these other kinds of behaviors, we have to think of a way that creates an accountability system that really does support each child, instead of which children give us the kind of grade on the accountability system. So that's kind of my pitch for using alternative kind of variables and criteria for your accountability system, which we can love to work with you on. I know. Oh, this is me.
Okay, so we've had a good discussion around this. Let me present your proposal. So it looks like our discussion has come up with some alternatives. Number one, change the weighting of the current accountability system. Take lists of options for feedback to different stakeholder groups. And then in the future, create a work group, bringing everyone together to further work on these issues. Will that wrap up our discussion to everyone's satisfaction? Does anyone else have input they want onto that?
I think you should work on the definition.
Oh,
in the work group?
Yeah, instead of, I mean, you could take what they've presented as a starting point, but then work on, instead of trying to hash that out here, I mean, if we had a couple options, and then we could try to figure out.
And also, if I might, a process for approval, because we're at sort of a standstill.
Approval for
If we're going to have a
or
different accountability system for alternative schools,
Okay,
we
for
need a
the school.
process for schools to be identified as alternative.
Work on definition and work on a process for identification.
And referral, or accountable.
Okay.
Because honestly, the hope is that we would have a full
Lynn Hanks?
to you next month. Yes.
Yeah, I think as I'm listening to the great discussion occurring, just recognize too in that committee is that your rural schools, so a school district that I represent, we represent exactly what you're saying. We have to look at that child because we don't have the alternatives to look at, right?
Yeah.
So we're being held accountable to that, to the system, but we too have students that maybe a GED is best, maybe adult ed is best, and that's an option we have, but it does ding against us on graduation rate. But we do that because it's best for the student. And so you have a lot of rural districts that are in that situation. And those resources are limited. We don't have resources. We're still limited to our resources to meet those student needs without having the alternative. So I think that I haven't heard that come up a lot. And I think that needs to be still part of the discussion. If there are some options for adjusting a graduation rate, maybe that adjustment needs to also be made available for these rural districts that don't have an alternative school option, but recognize that they still have that need.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. Okay, so we made notes. All right. Well, then let us move on now, and we appreciate all the input and the good work you folks have done.
We just had a clarification between work group and task force and what has to happen. And
So a subcommittee would be a committee of this, a sub, underneath this committee. And then a task force would be, the problem is it has to go before the board, so neither of those are going to work.
To create a task force.
Yeah, at the sub.
Yeah.
What about a work group? Yeah, I think
just a work group.
And I just don't know that we necessarily need board members on, like this.
On a work group.
I think it would just be
They could
Listening
kind of
associations
attend.
that are already
Yeah,
being
bringing people
inviting
together.
you to
So I don't know that
attend
we
and listen to
create
the discussion.
something, because those
Like,
have to
that's
be
what I'm
ratified
saying.
by the board.
That's what I'm
The
trying to
reason
do,
Yeah.
yeah.
that a
So-
board, but a
So
work,
let's not do the task force idea.
but a work
Let's do
group.
the work.
Yeah, you
group
can create
idea.
just a work.
But a work, but it's, the reason that board members, I'd like a board member or two on the work group is so that when we come back to a meeting like this, there's somebody that can translate it to board member language that
policy
says,
well?
yes, I've heard this, I appreciate this.
Because I think a work group would be considered a subcommittee.
Committee assign
And that might have to be
a member
ratified
as a-
also.
As a committee work group, or does that need to go
Yeah.
to leadership?
I don't.
That's what I think it might, we need to look at board policy. If we could take a minute while we go to the next item and look at board policy.
Board bylaws.
Either way, I don't know which
Well, I
one
mean, I
it
don't
would be
want
under.
to just,
Because there's two in it.
I think the bylaws just address creation of a task force. I don't think they say
They
anything
also talk
work
about
groups.
Linda's the one that really seems to
Let's see,
like
but
to
I
do
think,
this.
I
She
think the
knows.
board chair can assign board members to work in different.
I think you should be able to, it's just that some things require ratification from the full board, and that's what we just need to clarify to make sure we don't
And I think
tie
it
our
just
hands, because that would be
depends
next
on
month.
How formal you want it to be.
I think you
'Cause
can
we don't-
assign people to go do something
Yeah.
without it being formal.
Right.
Right.
Just don't call it something.
well, can I just be, I'll be glad to meet with you guys if you just don't have to call it anything formal.
I
or-
would not
Okay.
call it formal.
So just let me know when the meeting is and don't tell anybody.
So we will have a work group with board members that are assigned board
Maybe
chair.
just interesting.
Which would be, that would be an interesting
Well,
idea,
yeah.
right?
I just don't know if you need to call it a work group.
Right, I think you can just say we're
Stakeholder
assigning staff to go
We're
and
gonna
work
go
with
work
these
on it.
organizations, and then they invite committee members to come
Okay,
if they
that
want
would be the, so do we have that motion?
Yeah, I move that.
Oh.
It's not very clear.
I
Okay,
move
so-
that we have a.
all right, we have a secretary. Are you clear on what that motion is?
It can't be a motion.
Will you repeat it back
Well,
for
it
us,
could be a
please?
committee motion.
You're gonna have staff go, well, I have two, I have the three things to look at changing the weight of accountability measures, a list of options to take to stakeholders groups, and then create not necessarily a work group, but assign staff to go out and look at definitions and the process for identification and referral. And they can potentially invite board committee members to come in.
Right, and would you add to that the work group should consider rural issues such as their limited resources and the fact that these students are counted in their
Or
accountability?
how they fit into the alternative definition.
Task force.
Okay, time limited task force.
Okay, so there is a motion before us. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All three of us. All right, thank you so much. We have one last item on our agenda. This, I think, is 3.7. Or, no, we have two items. So we're now going to 3.7, which is underage drinking prevention advisory council. And here we go. I believe Lynette Scheiss, is that correct? She's, thank you, is going to present this item for us.
Okay, my name is Lynette Sheese. I'm the Substance Abuse Prevention Specialist here at USBE in the Department of Student Advocacy Services. This is just a report on the council and the progress we are making on the underage drinking prevention program. As reported last month, we had sent out an RFI and got back 3 responses. As an advisory council, we decided to go ahead and send out an RFP to see what responses we got from that RFP.
Okay, so just for everyone, clarify what you mean by an RFI.
Okay.
And an RFP.
Okay, so as a council, we were asked to qualify providers to deliver a underage drinking program in 8th grades and 10th grades. And so in order to qualify for those providers, we needed to see what was out there. So we sent out a request for information to over 700 vendors, as you will. And we only received 3 responses back, 2 of which were curriculum-based and 1 of which was a marketing-based company. As an advisory council, we still wanted to, we thought we would get more responses in sending out a request for proposal in which we could also look at cost involved. Yes. If we don't know if what we are proposing or what they are proposing will meet within the allocated funds that we have been given. And so we wanted to see proposals of what vendors could offer us. And so that request for proposal was posted on the 2nd of January. It will be posted for 2 weeks, at which time we will look at those proposals, see what comes back. A bill file has been opened on this 53A13-113, and we will be recommending, as an advisory council, we will be recommending to take the word presentation out of what is now written in the law. As an advisory council, we felt like a one-time presentation does not give and provide outcomes that we're looking for, proven outcomes that we are looking for. So we will be asking to remove the word presentation. We're also asking to open up the grades a little bit, to have it in 9th or 10th grade and 7th or 8th grade. If this program is delivered in the health classes, some LEAs do their health in 7th grade, not 8th grade. And so we will be recommending to open that, the grades up.
Okay, and do you have a bill sponsor that you're working with on this?
I believe that will be Representative Wilson. Deputy Superintendent Angie Stallings has been working with him.
Okay, so we have 2. You've created an underage drinking prevention advisory council.
Yes.
And we have 2 state board members on that, one of whom is Jenny Gravitt, who's out of them for a moment. And so this bill, this originally was passed last year, is that correct?
Yes.
And so you're working on it, and this is just making it better.
No, we are actually qualifying the providers for the schools because it's meant to be implemented in the 2018-19 school year.
Okay. And so you're looking for providers for this program. How much is your funding?
The total funding is $1.75 million, which is recurring funding. Ongoing. Thank you.
Okay. This is an information item. Are there questions from board members?
Thanks.
You mentioned that you want to remove the word presentation. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're hoping for? So you don't want a one-time thing. What are you looking to?
We are looking to qualify providers that have proven outcomes, which is more of a curriculum-based program that is, we actually sent out a survey to LEAs to find out what they would like in their schools, and what came back is that they would like evidence-based curriculum delivered by their classroom teachers in their own schools. And so we're looking to, we can qualify more than one provider, in which we are hoping to qualify multiple providers that LEAs can choose what will work best. but we're looking at evidence-based curriculum that will be delivered probably, most likely in the classroom, that will focus on behavioral risk factors.
Okay. Any input, questions from the board?
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out this working group thing, so I apologize.
Okay, then I think we'll say thank you very much.
Great.
Lynette, we appreciate your coming forth.
Thank you.
And we will move on now then to our 3.8, which is our school counselor report. And we have Kim Herrera and Holly Todd. Thank you.
Actually, I'm Lillian Sosa Jensen. I'm one of the educational coordinators in Student Advocacy Services. And longstanding, I had the opportunity to provide this report. Yes. And with growth, we have two specialists, Holly Todd and Kim Herrera. Kim has taken lead on this particular report and wanted to just give kudos and a shout out to our staff for an excellent job that they do. This reporting piece is part of R277462 to give this annual report to the board on the ratio. And I am very happy to say that our ratio statewide in secondary schools is 1:340, which is the lowest ratio that we've had in the state in secondary schools for the onset of school counseling in Utah. So with that, I want to turn the time over to Kim to give out the details of this report.
My name is Kim Herrera. I'm a school counseling program specialist and Student Advocacy Services. And the report has been provided for you in the backup documentations. And I would love to answer any of your questions after I just highlight a few things. On page 2, it gives an overview of where we are as secondary schools. And I'd like to start off with sharing some positives. We have 51 LEAs and 241 individual schools who are currently meeting the recommendation of 1:350 ratio. I also want to celebrate and publicly recognize 6 LEAs who have shown a declining ratio over the past 4 years. They are Cache, Ogden, Park City, San Juan, New Ames, and Tuacahn. And out of these 6 LEAs, 4 are actually to the national recommendation of 1:250. I also want to share some areas that we would love to see some improvement. We have 14 LEAs who currently do not meet the 1:350 ratio, and they will be asked to submit a plan for how they intend to meet this ratio. And then overall, as a state, we're looking at additional 24 FTEs needed to bring us up to that, and that has increased from last year. If you look at page 3, we did provide an elementary ratio report. As you know, school counselors are funded through CTE add-on funding, which only includes grades 7 through 12. So therefore, USB does not have any specific requirements for reporting on elementary school counseling ratios. But with our continued efforts, our board initiatives, and conversations around the importance of early intervention, as well as an increased need for additional student support, we thought this information would still be noteworthy. And then I just want to note, as you look at this data, there are some challenges when identifying FTEs of licensed school counselors in elementary schools. And I've outlined those challenges in the 3 bullet points on page 3. But the information that is there is accurate as of what is reported in Cactus as of the October 1st deadline. And I'm just open for any questions that you may have.
Okay, so question to you. Tell me a little bit more about that. This is funded through add-on funding. What does that exactly mean?
So the reality is we don't have funding that's appropriated solely for school counseling.
Right.
This funding comes out of, and it started in the late 80s with Dr. Lynn Jensen was here, staff at USBE, and working and was housed in CTE. Working with that, it was based on career development, and the CTE add-on funding piece, really, if you look at it as paying it for school counseling, it's only funding about a fourth of their program. The reality is the funding, since it was CTE add-on dollars, is that it's looking at career development. So there are state dollars that the way that the board rule is written, even though it's CTE add-on, it could be appropriated 7 through 12, but the focus should be on 9 through 12. But given the fact that we're looking at secondary schools, we have pretty much in the funding formula allocated that through 7 through 12.
So there really is what I'm trying to get to are these 14 high schools where they aren't meeting the ratio, and it looks like it in your detail it says that they haven't met the ratio for a few years.
3 of those have been over 4 years of currently submitting ratio plans.
Mm-hmm. So should there be any kind of a consequence for those schools? I mean, you think the counselors are going to be good for the students, but we don't, I mean, how do we make it better, and what kind of consequence could we do to make it better instead of being punitive? What are your thoughts?
I think I would leave that up to the board in discussion. When the board rule was written to put in the ratio plan, it was during a time that there was no funding, even less funding for education. And so instead of being punitive, what they put in there, the board decided at that time, was that individual LEAs that did not meet the ratio would come up with a ratio plan. Since that time, the WPU growth has definitely changed. And this last year, the WPU funding did change dramatically for CTE, and it was equal to the regular WPU. So as you look at the funding formula that has been allocated, it actually has increased, especially for our larger schools. So this would be a good opportunity to have that discussion as far as should we do something than a ratio plan.
Okay, so this would be a good opportunity to maybe are you thinking of earmarking some of that CTE add-on money for counseling? Would that be an example? So you're saying that the CTE money has increased, that's the add-on money that goes to fund this.
Well, the CTE money has increased, but the WPU for CTE has increased. So previously, before last year, CTE WPU was lower than the regular WPU, and now it is equal. That happened in the last legislation.
Okay.
And so for an example, in our funding formula, the base amount in the formula, schools qualify for a base amount of about $20,000. That's about average every single year. Previously, the maximum amount was only around maybe 40 to 41,000. With that change in the formula last year, now the top end of that is around 46 to 47,000. So not a lot has changed, but a little bit of an increase has certainly helped.
Okay, and how could we focus that increase towards counseling? I guess that's the
well, and again, you could change the formula, because the formula is giving those who are in an approved program a slice of the pie, so to speak. So it's not shifting that, it's just giving those the formula is giving schools a little additional money for more students. So you could look at the funding formula. However, with that said, about 3 years ago, we did have a work group of CTE directors that looked at the funding formula, and we spent a good year, and there really wasn't a better way to slice out pie. I mean, basically, you're trying to give many schools, we have over 300 schools, a small portion of funding. Again, it is for the career development piece.
ideally, it would be nice to have more money that would just be for school counseling.
So then, working with that, you don't see that as really an opportunity. So what could we do to get more funding for counselors? You know way more about it than we do. I mean, we can be your advocates. Can you give us something to
Well,
advocate
and
for?
I appreciate the advocacy, and truly, when we talk about that, we're talking about more school counselors, but really what we're talking about is more supports for students. And our students need more support than just CT and career development. As we look at the different components and even the board imperatives, there's language in the board imperatives that talk about students' well-being. And we can look at data sets that let us know that if we have a school culture, an environment, and staff support, such as a school counselor or other helping hand professionals, our students do better in those schools. So I appreciate the advocacy. It is, I hate to say, about more funding towards student supports, which would equal school counselors.
Go ahead. And I'm just coming recently out of the field, and we have really great data that shows that early intervention for elementary school counseling. I don't know if you're familiar with what transpired in Tooele County School District, but they funded some elementary school counselors and kept really good data and have been sharing that out statewide. But what they found is one of the school counselors unfortunately had a heart attack mid-year. And while in his absence over the past 4 months, the discipline and behavior spiked in office referrals. And then upon his return, they went back down and stabilized. And so there is some data that shows that school counseling programs can have positive student outcomes and be an integral part of the success of the academics for students.
So that was for elementary counselors?
Yes.
Which are so few.
I know, and that's why I just wanted to put that, share that personal story, is because we do fund, 7 through 12, but we know that early intervention is so important.
So if I may add on really quick, national ratio is 1 to 250. A current Utah ratio is in secondary is 1 to 350. Elementary gets 1 to 2005 only if there is a counselor there. If there's not a counselor there, it's not counted in the denominator. So it's really not 1 to 2005 students, it's 1 to even more, because we don't know whether there are schools that aren't even included in there because they don't have a counselor. And then we also have the research that's in there, it's speaking, and there's even more to this report, which is the level, anxiety, social, emotional, those events that are occurring in the elementary age have increased dramatically. So I think that Chair Cannon is trying to say, and we're dancing a nice little dance here, but I'm just always good to put it on the table, which is, that's one thing, which is in requesting this, I know in the past there's been a request to make this a priority for funding, and then there's also been a request to the legislature to fund additional counselors, and it's similar to many conversations that we have, that to put one school counselor and then to see the need to even bring it down to 1 in 1,000 students, that the funding would be astronomical. And then whenever we make a decision for funding one thing, it takes funding from another thing. So we constantly have this dance of the money of what are our priorities and what will impact students the most. And so I think Chair Cannon is asking, what can we do right now where we're at? And has it been made a priority in the board? And then if so, do we have anyone legislatively maybe that's working on it? I think those are the types of questions that perhaps Chair Cannon is trying to get to. And what kind of support do you need from us now in moving forward at this time and in the future?
So to answer your question and to add on to that, over the years that I have tracked this, we're in the top 3 of the nation of the highest ratio, student to counselor ratio. And it really is our lack of elementary school counselors. We look pretty good at the secondary level in comparison, but if you take into account grades K through 12, we are like I said, top 3. With that said, earlier today, I was with our our suicide prevention specialist, and we were talking about suicide prevention. And we know that suicide is the leading cause of death of our youth, ages 11 through 17. And it's hard not to get emotional about the data as well as the anecdotal pieces that I hear about on a regular basis, and the phone calls that we get from our stakeholders and parents around bullying. And we know that our students need support, dare say, in crisis. Because as we look at Maslow's hierarchy, that if our students don't feel safe, supported, they're not going to do well in school. To add to the question, without trying to get on my soapbox, I'll continue on. I know that there's conversation with Representative Elison, who's been a supporter around suicide prevention, looking at running a pilot. Last year he did run a pilot bill, he ran a bill that was for a pilot program for elementary school counseling. It did not pass. Conversations around opening that up again and including even some trauma-informed care professional development for educators, for all educators, to help them understand and support. As we look at data sets, schools like San Francisco Unified, the data that they have around creating trauma-sensitive schools actually helps with teacher retention. Yeah. And I think that's pretty powerful. So not only are we just talking about school counselors, we're talking about a whole community. We're talking about our youth. I'm trying not to get on my soapbox here, because I get very passionate about what do we need to do to support our kids in crisis. And really, I hate to say it, but it is about funding, and we do the dance of the dollars, but our kids are in crisis. I do appreciate the support. I, professionally speaking, would hope that the board would continue to make that a priority as they look at their priorities for this legislation session.
Then I just have one other thing so we're doing fairly well in terms of the ratio with high school kids. But it seems to me like even at that level, we have a dichotomy. That is, we need academic counselors, but we need social emotional counselors. So now we have this one counselor to 350 kids, and they could spend their full time doing one or doing the other, because there's that much for them to do. So what are your thoughts on that division of counseling duties?
Well, I think as you look at the licensing for school counseling, it is pretty broad. They are trained in the area of the social emotional, student supports, foundational skills, not necessarily clinical pieces, but just helping those students' well-being, to the broad set of the academic, and now with the College of Credit certificate, helping them around scholarships, financial aid, and so forth. I think what really happens is the leadership within the LEA or the individual school looking at the demographics of what best meets the needs of their students. And so you will see administration or principals say, okay, my school A really needs more help around college and readiness. So I want my school counselors, whether they're trained in X, Y, and Z, to focus on the scholarship piece, because that's their important, that's what they're looking at in their demographic. Or maybe school B looking at their demographics, and again, their leadership making that choice. There may be a greater need around group counseling and connecting students to supports. So it's up to the LEA, and there's choice of leadership and their demographics.
I was just going to say, I am an English teacher, but I am a certified school counselor as well, and so I've been through the training, and sometimes my school, they'll call some of us in to do some help, but what I've noticed is when you have a school with certain demographics. So just last week, our school counselors, all three of them, were with kids who were suicidal. The problem is there's a huge need for them to deal with that, but with that need also comes the need for more help academically. And so I wish, and I don't know what the solution is, but I wish we could look at some demographics at schools and say, you know what, we need to decrease the ratio in a school like this, because our kids aren't only suffering mental health wise, but academically they're suffering, and then it becomes this vicious cycle. And it's like, it breaks my heart. And I just don't know what the solution is, because you need both skills as a school counselor anymore. You've got to have the ability to help them academically, but it's like the hierarchy of needs. You've got to help them feel safe and valued and with the will to live. So,
I'm wondering if you have seen any schools that have partnered with the community instead of taking on this school counseling, because sometimes the school tries to provide everything, and I recognize that there's needs for students that have issues, but it's not always, we don't have the funding, the resources, it's not always the school's job to fix that problem. But if we can partner with entities that's their strength, that's what they do, and it sounds like you have something to say back there about it, but anyway, but to build those relationships instead of trying to build our own.
There are a lot of schools, as part of the evaluation system, we look at their collaborating partners based on their demographics. So there's a lot of collaboration going on. But with that said, I would take the opportunity to have Kim highlight her experience as a school counselor, because she came from Stansbury High School that did something very unique with their individual planning that really looked at the whole child. And I saw greater movement and student support come out of that school than I did in many other schools across the state. So I would really like for you to share that.
Yes, and the answer is yes. We partnered with our local Valley Mental Health, and they came and did a lot of supports for us. But what we chose to do is focus that individual plan, the plan for college and career readiness, and really used a systemic approach to embed a lot of those indicators and accountability pieces within our schools. So our teachers supported us a lot in some of the financial pieces, the scholarship pieces. So when we had that individual meeting, it was more of, what's your story? How can we help? Building those connections so they felt safe to come to us if there was an additional need with their parent, because we had really high, because of the meeting and being in so personal, and not just giving a speech, we had averaging about 88% parent attendance. So we were having those conversations with the parents, and it opened up more for those foundational skills and social emotional learning, because we systemically had other practices happening to support us. So yes, I do think that it is possible to utilize our resources around us to free us up to meet both needs. And I also, just as a school counselor, want to share that our program model really supports our work in meeting all of those needs between college and career readiness, as well as the dropout prevention with social emotional support.
If the board will allow, I would like to call Lynette Sheese back up, because she's a former elementary school counselor.
Oh, one of the rare people.
One in 2005. Look, I just want to speak to elementary counseling, and even in the elementary school, we partnered with outside partnerships to come in and provide the more at-risk students help. But as an elementary school counselor, my job was prevention. I was in classrooms teaching skills to students, and I think that that's something that you can't get with that partnership. I mean, yes, they are valuable to help with those students who I didn't feel qualified to help, because their needs were more than I could do, and so that partnership is very valuable. But my job was prevention and trying to fix it before it was a problem.
And can I piggyback off that? I'm currently doing my administrative internship at an elementary school at North Lake Elementary in Tualatin County School District. And they have, so part of our program is collaborative instruction. So they work with the teachers, so those practices are reinforced when that counselor leaves. And I have seen it firsthand with the PBIS system that's in place at the school that I'm at. Everything's reinforced. They're all using the same prompts. When I do lunch duty, they know because they're knights, and when they salute, all the kids come to attention so they can hear the directive. So I do know that that is a powerful preventative tool when you work alongside the teacher, because then it's an ongoing reinforcement in their everyday life.
Was there a comment, did I miss a comment over here?
She was asking about the partnerships with the community and there are districts that already have community. I mean, like we call ours a local interagency committee that pulls their resources together, because there are some needs of students that can't be met at that school level. The credentials are just not, they need something more. But also through HB, I think it was 238, it's the whole youth judge justice, is that the right one? 239. 239? Yeah, that is requiring that there be some type of local, some type of interagency, to meet some of these
Thank you.
needs. So.
Good information. All right. So I guess, so this is an information item. Have you ever gotten a report back from one of these people who are supposed to reduce the ratio, and have, what have they said that their idea is to reduce the ratio? Have there been any great, remarkable ideas?
In some cases, there's been remarkable growth. Through the years, I would point out districts like Jordan School District, where they track the data and took that information and data set to their local board and could see the impact of the role of the school counselor, and they were able to shift some funding pieces to add more school counselors. The same is true with Nebo School District, even though Nebo School District is one of our highlights that they need a ratio plan, but a lot of times we're looking at is growth. So they make the shift and change to meet the students' needs, but then it's an area where there's building and growth in the community, and so it's kind of revamping into what they're doing. Are there anything amazing thing happening? I think that for the money that they have, they're doing amazing things.
Did you want to add to that?
And I just want to share with the elementary piece, when you were talking about making that a priority, putting it in the overall WPU, then of course then they make that decision of where that fund goes, and so looking at some way providing some kind of line item for elementary would be wonderful.
Okay, so you're looking for a line item rather than wrapping it into the
just an idea, just a recommendation to consider that as a priority. But
and maybe to wrap up all of this conversation that's been stated, board member Gravitt spoke also about having an alternate ratio for schools with higher indicators, maybe on the ACEs or something like that. You didn't say ACEs, but
I did say ACEs.
Okay, she said ACEs. Yeah, she meant to say ACEs. So, some sort of a differentiated ratio based on need.
Yeah.
And looking at that, and then in moving forward, maximizing efforts outside from board member Ellis's point, maximizing those that are intervention, realizing that the work of the school counselor is prevention, and most of those outside resources are intervention after the fact, that they are supporting that piece of it. And then, we talked about some different funding that is currently happening. I think one of those things we talked about was CTE funding, but that is really, is that it's not an option for the way that it's currently. Okay, I just wanted to close that loop as well. So I think in looking forward, the report is in, accepting the report, and then moving forward is now it's on people's radar to have those discussions and to see where it is and some possible actions.
Okay, so should we I'll take a motion to receive the report.
I move that we receive the report.
Thank you, Jen. Then all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Oh, we really love the
Same
support.
appreciation.
I know.
Yay.
So appreciative.
Okay. So.
Quick. Okay, so can we go back to 3.3? So I'm getting kind of conflicting information. Chair Huntsman said anything that goes outside the committee for work needs to be board approved, but then Lorraine said that the committee can appoint a subcommittee or groups that report back to the committee. So I know you would be safe if we just directed staff to reach out to stakeholders and report back to us.
I think that's.
There we go.
Bingo.
I know that's safe. So, and I think it's also safe to invite board members if they wanted to watch that meeting.
So do you need to make a motion?
So maybe we need to amend that motion to, instead of creating a work group, to direct staff to reach out to stakeholders to answer the questions that have been identified by the board, by the committee.
And to bring it back.
And to bring it back in February.
Okay.
There's a lot of different.
You need to get clear on that.
I know, I'm really bad.
Yeah.
Taking this.
Okay.
You're really good at summing up
You
discussion
are
points.
good.
You are
And
really.
you're good at hearing things that I don't say.
That's so great.
She mind reads well. Today's my day, I guess.
Today.
Next time.
I don't know, you've been on a roll lately,
Okay.
so.
So do we need to amend our motion then
Yeah.
on the work group?
So I made
So
an amendment to the motion.
Okay. Do you want to state that for us?
She wrote it down. I move that we amend the motion for item 3.3, that instead of creating a work group, we, let's talk at lunch. That we direct staff to reach out to stakeholders and report back to the committee in February to answer the questions.
Does that give staff sufficient time?
Oh, absolutely not, but we will.
They report back.
We report back to where we're at.
Okay. All right, then, all in favor of the amendment to the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. We motion to adjourn? I'll
so
make
moved.
it. I'll make it. Motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.